Good evening and welcome to the weeknight. I'm Alicia Menendez with Michael Steele and Luke Russert in for Simone Sanders-Townsend. Breaking tonight, the cost of Donald Trump's war with Iran is rising. The president doesn't have a clear plan for what comes next, and it's already starting to weigh on the GOP's chances in the midterms.
Then Senator Tammy Duckworth, a combat veteran, is demanding public hearings on the war. She's at the table with her plan to force the hands of Republicans.
And later, the Democratic National Committee is now suing the Trump administration over growing concerns that armed agents could appear at polling places this November. But folks, let's begin tonight in Georgia. Moments ago, polls closed in a special election to fill Marjorie Taylor Greene's vacant House seat. Y'all remember all the drama around that, right? Well, 17 candidates are battling to represent Georgia's 14th district. Ali Velshi will bring us the numbers as soon as they come in. Tonight's special election comes less than 8 months until the midterms, and Donald Trump seemingly still doesn't have a plan to win over voters, failing to lay out a substantive agenda at a GOP conference last night. Nor does he have a plan to end his war with Iran, a war of choice that's driving up gas prices. Today, CNN reported that Iran started laying mines in the Strait of Hormuz, a crucial trade route for the world's oil supply that could make those gas prices you're now paying, right, an even worse issue for you and the president. A short time ago, Trump said online, quote, "We have hit and completely destroyed 10 inactive mine-laying boats," end quote. And then there's the growing human cost of Trump's war, which Trump has also struggled to address. 8 soldiers have died in the Middle East since the start of the conflict. Today, the Pentagon confirmed about 140 U.S. troops have been wounded. 8 remain severely injured. A new Quinnipiac University poll finds 74% of registered voters oppose putting boots on the ground in Iran. 57% disapprove of how Trump's handling the situation altogether. Here's Senator Elizabeth Warren after a briefing today with administration officials.
This is not a war the American people want us to engage in. It is still the case that the Trump administration cannot explain the reasons that we entered this war, the goals we're trying to accomplish, and the methods for doing that. The one part that seems clear is that while there is no money for 15 million Americans who lost their health care, there's $1 billion a day to spend on bombing Iran.
Let's bring in MS Now political analyst and former Montana Senator John Tester. Also with us, Angela Corazon, president of Media Matters.
Senator, welcome back to D.C. You know, we've talked a lot about the cost of oil and what that is meaning for Americans at the pump. I want to talk with you a little bit about what it means for farmers, because in addition to the Strait of Hormuz moving about 20% of the world's oil, it also moves a good percentage of our nitrogen fertilizer. What are you hearing from farmers? How is it driving up costs? And how soon before I start seeing that at the grocery store?
Well, I don't know when you'll see it at the grocery store, but I'm telling you, farmers are feeling it already. Let's start with the tariffs. It hasn't been a very good situation. It's increased input costs, raised hell with our markets. And now, with energy prices going up, we use a lot of energy in agriculture, and this is going to cut another hole in. The margins are they're not that good right now. They're very, very slim. Increased energy costs is ultimately there's going to be a lot of farmers go out of business because of the tariffs. There's going to be a lot more go out if these energy costs keep going up and they stay up.
Angelo, it feels as if the messaging has gotten completely away from this White House in a way that they have not necessarily faced to this degree. People don't trust them domestically. People are not now trusting them in terms of foreign policy. And the economy, which is what they used to win in 2024, is flashing big yellow lights. You also see gas is going up. You see the housing market is cratering. You see the feds now saying they might delay a rate cut because of the war in Iran. Given all of this, is it not tailor-made now for Democrats to push that issue and say, listen, Donald Trump and the Republicans, they do not care about you in any way, and this is proving it beyond doubt?
Yeah, without a doubt, because the one thing, you know, it's they've lost control of the messaging, but it's something even bigger than that, and that's to your point, why there's a real opportunity here. And I'm usually the naysayer at the table, and that is because they've never really had to do this type of messaging. What happens is Trump makes a claim, And then there's this massive right-wing media narrative engine behind him that backfills it and turns it into reality for a very large part of the American population and his base. And that engine is not doing that right now. What they're doing is sort of fracturing over gas prices, over how it's going to affect farmers, how it's going to affect their home issues, and of course, just the fact that they thought they were being sold no wars, not new wars. And so that means that they can't just get out there and make these claims to do it. So what does that mean in practice? One, he doesn't have the thing backing him up. So these numbers are going to get worse, not better. Two, there's a real opportunity for Democrats to actually break through and actually project a narrative, because that engine does want things to spin. Now, they may not carry water for Democrats, but they'll certainly carry water for the storyline around the economy. And there's a warning. So even if that's not enough of an incentive to do it, there's a thing to avoid. He's putting little poison pills out there to try to pull people back in. When he says he's not going to sign legislation, he's starting to say, well, let's start going after trans people again. The right-wing media is slowly starting to consolidate around this narrative that, look, maybe the Iran war actually means more deportations. We can target mass populations of Muslims in this country. And that's starting to simmer that down a little bit. He's beginning to inject the SAVE Act into the conversation. So he's trying to poke around to say, is there something new that could help people reconnect? So that's the moment to drive forward. Not just that there's a big opportunity, and there's actually an urgency to it, because eventually they will find their footing.
Yeah, Senator, I think, Angelo makes a great point there, and it's a concerning one from where I'm sitting, because basically you're watching real time this guy spin us into more BS. And just spin up as much as he can and just whip it in such a way that you can't. It's like, that scene at the beginning of The Wizard of Oz when the tornado hits and the house comes on board and it's flying and you see all this debris and everything's flying around. But in the center of that is this house where, Dorothy, presumably she's just lying there on the floor watching the whole thing go by. That's kind of where it is for a lot of Americans, where they're sitting inside of this bubble, watching all this stuff whirl around them, and the messaging becomes important. And to your initial point, to Alicia's question, the economy is at the root of that. Despite everything that Angelo just said, at the end of the day, Americans, voter or non-voter, have to deal with their pocketbooks. And that reality is something that Trump still has not been able to get a grip on. I guess the question is, when the polling is showing that slippage, 57% overall don't like what he's doing. Certainly the number is higher when it comes to the economy. What is the nature of the conversation that Democrats, Republicans like myself, independents, like-minded Americans should be having with their neighbors? Because this brother does it every day. He listens, right? I don't know how much talking you get to do with some of these folks, but I know you do a lot of listening. What do we have to start saying to them to help them understand that whirling dervish is not going to land you in a good spot at the end of the day?
You just got to tell the truth. And what the problem is that, and we saw it in the State of the Union, the president paints one picture about what the economy, and reality is folks go to the store and they see a whole different reality. And so you got to use real life examples of how it's impacting, if you're talking production agriculture, family farms in this country. If you're talking small businesses on Main Street, how it's impacting them. If you're talking working families, how it's impacting them. Because quite honestly, until you get the affordability issue under control, and he's in denial on that, by the way, then you're going to have a situation where, come the next election, I think it's going to be an election that bodes very, very well for Democrats if they get a message that talks about those affordability issues and solutions.
And that
to
can
those
bleed into the
issues.
Senate races.
Yeah, absolutely. No, look, I'm very optimistic about what's going to happen this November if we have a free and fair election. I think that the House is going to do very, very well. There's, 55 incumbents that aren't running again in the House, 10 in the Senate as of right now, and we're in, the 10th of March. There'll be more, I'm sure. And then I think come November, unless things change pretty dramatically, and I don't see the president changing, he's going to keep doing what he's doing because that's what he does. I think you're going to see people go, we tried this not once but twice. It really hasn't worked. We're going to go a different direction. But the Democrats have to have a message, and it has to be a message that hit home and deals with these issues, whether it's economy, health care, the war, whatever it might be.
So Republicans are looking at the same polls that the senator is looking at. They are looking at the same maps that the senator is looking at. And so they show up at their GOP conference waiting for Dear Leader to impart a message that they can then utilize in the fall. And instead, Angelo, what they get from the president, from the leader of their party, is more talk about the SAVE Act. Let me read you this reporting from Punchbowl News. For a restless House Republican conference eager for a vision on how to win in 2026, Trump didn't offer much that was terribly substantive, highlighting one of the central challenges for the party. Trump didn't unveil any detailed plan to bring down the cost of living. That's the issue that Democrats and voters insist will be the difference in November. The SAVE Act is a tactic. It is not something that they can go into November selling. You've seen all the same polling that I've seen. There are strong spots for them. There is a sense that they have handled the U.S.-Mexico border separate and distinct from their deportation machine. But there's not a delivery on the core issues outside of that they promised the American people. So what do they have to sell people come November?
I mean, the only thing they could sell people is that they were doing their jobs. Right? They were putting some speed bumps in the schools on here. They were being the guardrails. They were defending their institutions. They were bucking the president when he was doing all these extremely unpopular things that nobody wants. So that would be the one thing that they could do to save themselves. But they're stuck on the tracks. They see the train coming. They don't have the will to get off. That's why there's going to be this political fallout for them. And then, what I can't figure out is that they can't seem to. Trump is like the worst person to be on a group project with, right? Because
he's speaking my language. Go ahead.
He's not going to do the work, and then when it comes time to turn it in, somehow you're going to get blamed when it all goes well. And that's what the SAVE Act is about. In the short term, it's about creating some tactical leverage, giving him a wedge. Maybe he can do some nefarious things, and believe me, they're planning it because they're talking about it. They're going to try. But when it all goes up and everybody loses, he's going to say, see, it's all their fault. They didn't pass the SAVE Act, and so the election was stolen. Of course they lost. It's not because of the politics or the policies or anything I've done. It's because they didn't act. And that's the part that, when it all comes together, it's not even that they're not saving themselves. They're actively helping him set them up to be the fall people for it.
Yeah, in my neighborhood, we call that stupid. So.
Senator, you came into Congress at the height of the Iraq War, and that was very much at the forefront of voters' minds. And I go back to that time, and I often think about, you had an administration that was saying, trust us, trust us, trust us, we know what we're doing. Then Hurricane Katrina happens, and immediately people go, wait, if we can't even take care of our own people in the United States, how the heck can we expect to take care of our soldiers in the Middle East and folks over there? And I wonder if you think with Iran there's a similar correlation in the sense of, you have a war now that's greatly unpopular, and you have a lot of people saying, oh, it's going to be over. The president saying, oh, it'll be over in a week. Oh, maybe it'll be 5 weeks. Oh, we might have boots on the ground. We don't know yet. But it seems to be jumping all over the place. Does that, in a place like Livingston, Montana, resonate with a guy watching TV who may have voted for Trump the last time around going, wait, we're in a war with Iran. He has no idea why. I don't know why the young folks in my community could be sent to die there. Oh, and by the way, if that's the case, how can I trust him that he says he's going to try to bring down my grocery bill?
You're spot on all of it. Now, let me tell you something. I think the Iraq was very hot when I got elected in 2006. Remember that, Michael? Yeah. And I think that the administration then spent a year talking about why we needed to do that. And it didn't go very well. I think Iran's far worse. I think it's far bigger of an anvil for these folks to carry. We're spending $1 billion a day. Lives are being lost. Look, Saddam Hussein wasn't a good dude, and neither was the guy they took out the first day of that's been replaced by his son, who's probably worse than he was, by the way. But things are not. And the other thing is people don't understand why we had to do this now. I mean, people have been talking about doing something with Iran for 47 years. Why now? Why is this, when there are negotiations, everybody says negotiations doing well, why? And that's, I could ask all of you, you probably say, well, it might have something to do with the economy, might have something to do with the Epstein files, might have something to do with something else, because there's a lot of stuff that could divert people if you get into a war. But the bottom line is, I think Iran is one hell of an anvil. And it's not that Iran was a good actor. It wasn't. Hasn't been a good actor for nearly 5 decades. But the bottom line is people are asking the same questions you asked, Luke. Why? Why now? Why is this so important? And then apply it back to what's going on in the economy, apply it back to what's going on in these tariffs, apply it back to what's going on in healthcare in this country. And I don't know. I'd hate to be a Republican this cycle. I'll tell you that.
It's a good question, because the only thing we seem to have at it is that these luxury real estate partners were the ones who said that this was a good idea.
That's it.
And that's not a great reason to go to war in the United States of America.
The only ones that you've got real estate guys negotiating with Iran in a room, and that begs the question, I guess, in the context of everything we've talked about, Angelo, is there a point, or are you beginning to see a point where there's a little sliver of light, a little crack in that veil of tears that we see on the Republican side in the MAGA-verse, where some of the key actors begin to sort of look at November, assess where they are, and go, you know what? I'm going to wait till we get to the other side of this because this is not going to end well for a whole lot of our folks.
Look, a lot of them are accepting Trump's going to not be there, and you know he's going to lose, and that's a big part of it. The sliver is that they're just, some of them are breaking, but they're getting worse. They're channeling this anger inward and saying, we need to not just take it out on Trump, we need to take it out on everybody now. Yeah.
Wow.
Angela Corsone, always so good to have you in studio. Wow. Senator Tester, what a treat to have you here with us. After the break, Senator Tammy Duckworth is going to join the conversation. She is one of the Democrats demanding the Trump administration provide public testimony over its war with Iran. Also had polls just closed in the Georgia special election to fill Marjorie Taylor Greene's old congressional seat. And that's now's Ali Velshi is going to join us from the big board with the latest. We're watching the weeknight. Democrats are threatening to grind the Senate to a halt until the White House provides answers to Americans about Trump's war with Iran. A group of Senate Democrats is demanding senior administration officials testify before key committees under oath about the military operation in the Middle East. And if Republicans don't go along with those hearings, Democrats are threatening to trigger a series of repeated votes on new war powers resolutions that could stall business as usual in the chamber. Joining us now, one of those Democrats, Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois.
Senator, welcome to the table. I like your style. I've been saying for weeks now, because if the shoe were on a different foot with these guys, they would do what? The Republicans would be doing exactly that. They would be grinding the thing down. They would be making the point. I think you have the opportunity to really make the point, to get the country's attention about something that they know innately that they should know something more about than they do, meaning why are we sending our boys and girls over to fight? So what do you hope the public learns from these hearings, and what are you hoping to get out of that?
Well, these are the tools of the Senate, right, to force these hearings to happen. We need to know if the threat was significant. Was it a true threat, or were they really going to have, long-range ballistic missiles that don't exist that they're going to shoot the U.S.? Was it truly imminent? And is this the best use of our military to achieve the end goal, right? What is the end goal? And is the military the right tool to achieve that end goal? So those are three simple things that we're trying to figure out. And frankly, we've had 2 top-secret briefings from the administration, and I can't tell you what was in the briefing, but I can tell you what was not in it. What was the end state? What is the next step? What is the off-ramp? How long are we going to be there? None of those questions were answered.
On that point, your colleague, Senator Blumenthal from Connecticut, he had this to say about that briefing. I want to play it for you and get you on the other side.
I emerged from this briefing as dissatisfied and angry, frankly, as I have from any past briefing in my 15 years in the Senate. I am left with more questions than answers. I am most concerned about the threat to American lives of potentially deploying our sons and daughters on the ground in Iran.
Our sons and daughters on the ground in Iran. You're somebody who's made close to the ultimate sacrifice for this nation. What do you think it'll take for your colleagues in the Senate to be aware of this being a real possibility, and that if it is going to be a real possibility, that should be debated out for the public to know? What will it take to get them there?
Yeah, I mean, we've already lost 7 American lives, right? And dozens were injured. And frankly, they need to put their oath to protect and defend the Constitution and their loyalty to this nation above their loyalty to Donald Trump. I don't know what I can say to my colleagues to say, listen, it is our solemn responsibility when we decide to send American troops into harm's way. They're going to do the best job possible. They're going to get out there, and they're always going to sacrifice, and they're going to carry it out with the utmost patriotism and professionalism. It's our responsibility as senators to make sure that we don't misuse them, right? It's our solemn responsibility to do that. And what we have right now is a president who launched a war of choice without truly thinking it through and just threw our troops into harm's way without any way of safeguarding them. You can't just throw out troops into harm's way with no plan on what the next step is. And, you know, if Pete Hegseth actually paid attention in Officer Basic Course, he'd know that any operations order ends with, what is the end state?
Yeah.
You know, take the bridge, hold the bridge till a force comes in to relieve you. Well, there's always an end state. There is no end state here that they've been able to articulate.
Just real quickly, though, but given the stakes, I mean, does the apathy surprise you on this? Because you think back of guys like John McCain and Chuck Hagel that would never, ever go for something like this to be completely quiet with the chance of boots on the ground.
Yeah, and I don't know what they're afraid of. Yeah. Because right now, the allegiance should be to the nation and our national security, and that's not where we are right now, right? And in fact, what I see in the briefings, whether it was the Venezuela mission or this, is in these briefings, they give these great briefings, talk about how great our military did, and then everybody stands up and claps. They're hiding their incompetence behind the valor of our military men and women, as if to say that that we're questioning why we're at war is to question the valor of our military. Not at all. I know that our military will always do the best job possible. And that means that we are beholden as legislators to do our job before we ask the military to do their job. And our job is to decide issues of, is this the right war? Are we under threat? Is this the best use of our military? And how are we going to end this? And how do we move forward? Because right now, we don't have an end state. Right now, Americans are not safer than before he launched his attack. Gas prices are going up. They went up over 30 cents in Chicago. We're going into planting season, right? I come from a farming state, and so you see all of our inputs are skyrocketing. Diesel fuel is going up, and America's prices are going up for the average American family. Nobody's better off here. And he took out a brutal dictator in the Ayatollah and replaced him with an equally brutal dictator who may be even more dangerous than his father was.
One of the tells about the lack of clarity around end state is the fact that their timeline on this keeps evolving and shifting. Let's take a listen to what we heard from Pete Hegseth and from the president.
I think you'll see it's going to be a short-term excursion.
From the beginning, from this podium, we haven't stated how long it will take.
We're ahead of our initial timeline by a lot. It's going to be ended soon.
It's not for me to posit whether it's the beginning, the middle, or the end.
Are you thinking this week it will be over?
No,
Are you talking
but soon.
about days?
I think soon.
Okay, and with respect
Very soon.
Okay, that's just sound from yesterday and today. They can't get their own messaging straight. If you are someone who is possibly being deployed and you are listening to the President of the United States and Secretary Hegseth not be able to tell you how long they plan for this to go on, what message does that send to you?
That my leaders are incompetent and that they've not thought this mission through and that they're throwing me to be cannon fodder.
Okay, so they don't have a clear timeline, but I want to talk a little bit about your timeline here. As you said, you were utilizing all the tools of the Senate. The possibility of reintroducing a war powers resolution. Can you give us a sense of how soon we could see that vote?
Well, it's got to go through all of the times that you have to wait, but it could be as soon as hopefully the end of this week or even the next week, and each one of us will introduce our own. So once we force one vote, we'll go back and we'll force another vote the following week and another vote. And so this could take a long time to make them go through this whole process, and that is going to stop the work of the Senate. Frankly, if we are at war, I can't think of anything more important than a discussion of whether we should be at this war. And by the way, we did this to a Democratic president, right? We forced Obama to come to us before he wanted to force strikes into Libya. He had to come to the Senate and talk about getting permission to fight ISIS. And so this is not something that we're doing just because we have a Republican in the White House. This is about us doing our job and honoring our troops more than just, you know, standing up and clapping for them, but honoring our troops by actually doing our jobs and not wasting their patriotism and their valor for political gain.
Well, that part for me is important, I think, for Americans to hear. And we're hearing it a lot more, that the Senate Democrats, at least, are beginning to step into the space with a little bit more aggression, if you will, to just kind of make the point and push the administration to respond. And so that's why I started our conversation by saying, yeah, thank you, more please, because I think that a lot of Americans are looking for that. They're, you know, when you get into the political space, and just to dabble a little bit in politics, because this is a serious question about war, but it is tinged a lot with the politics because this is how Trump wants to play the game. All right, you want to play? Let's play. The politics of this says that Democrats aren't going to be as straightforward, as strong-footed, as sure to move forward and to press the case. That's not what I'm hearing from you. That's not what I'm hearing from members of the House, whether it's dealing on the war or dealing with the Epstein files. So this consistent flavor, I think, is something the American people like. How does that translate, do you see politically, that you're building this trust for the country to hand the power to you to reset the course of the country off of a war footing, both in terms of what we're seeing play out in Iran, but also the economic impact that it could have for them and their families?
Well, I think Americans want to know that we're fighting for them, that we're representing them, and that we put their interests first and foremost, not the interests of large oil corporations or a singular president, that we're fighting for them. When I'm in Illinois, whether I'm in the red parts of Illinois, by the way, I've been doing town halls. I've been going across into Missouri. Like when Holly doesn't do a town hall, I go to Missouri and I do a town hall. I've been going to Iowa and doing town halls. And people just want answers. You know who shows up? Of course. The vast majority of people who show up are not even Democrats. They're independents, or I get a lot of veterans who show up who say, hey, my benefits are being cut, and now we're going to go to war, and we're not even keeping our promise to the veterans who've already served, and now we're sending more folks to war. So they just want to know that we're going to fight, right? And look, it's March Madness, right? I played a little basketball. I mean, back when I had legs. But, you know, I feel like Democrats continue to try to follow the rule book. Meanwhile, they're kneecapping the refs.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And I'm not saying that we should go out and kneecap the refs, but we should be more aggressive. We can't just sit here and not fight for the American people. That's how Democrats lost the vote, was because Americans did not think we were fighting for them. That we didn't care that their gas prices went up, that we were so worried about niche issues that we're not paying attention to the fact, my farmers are just devastated. I have so many farmers who come to me and like, I'm 7th generation, but there's not going to be an 8th generation. The tariffs have taken away our markets. The tariffs have now made our input costs too high. And I'm looking at selling the family farm. They want us to fight for them. And we're going to fight for them. And when we get back into control, we're going to make sure that we've not just fixed the problems, but we make things better than they were before. And that we show folks that we're willing to fight for average families, and that we're not going to waste our nation's resources, whether that is our natural resources or whether that is the most important resource, the most valuable resource we have, the men and women who wear the colors of this nation.
Amen. And oh, by the way, I know a few refs, you may not want to kneecap them, but they could use a good talking to, that's for sure. Senator Tammy Duckworth, thank you so much for being with us tonight. It's good to have you at the table. Folks, in just a moment, we'll speak with Mary McCord about a new lawsuit from the Democratic National Committee that's looking to find out if the Trump administration plans to put armed agents at polling locations near you this November. That's next, right here on The Weeknight.
The Democratic National Committee is suing the Trump administration, seeking information about potential plans to send armed agents to polling sites during the midterm elections. DNC lawyers previously filed nearly a dozen Freedom of Information Act requests to obtain that information. But the group says those requests were ignored. So now they're suing, quote, to ensure that the American people obtain timely knowledge of potential threats to free and fair elections. Joining us now, Mary McCord, former Assistant Attorney General for National Security at the Justice Department. She's the host of MS Now's Main Justice podcast and an MS Now legal analyst. Always does the best research. Welcome, Mary.
There is something that has been bothering me all day, which is these FOIA requests are from back in October. And you think about this administration and how low they seem to put things on paper. So there is the real possibility that none of this exists on paper, but that they do have an understanding of what it is they plan to do or contingency plans. How, if that is the case, do you get to that core intent?
Well, that's hard to do. And, you know, if you, like you say, if you never put something on paper, you're not going to have anything to produce in response to a FOIA request. If you've been, you know, doing things by phone calls or in live meetings, there's just not going to be that type of record. But they're still obligated to say, we have nothing in response to your requests. And these requests went to the Department of Justice, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and its various components, ICE, CBP, the Department of Defense, National Guard, et.cetera. Like, have you been talking about it? Do you have any plans? And we just, you know, it's been kind of crickets. I mean, nothing substantive in response, including not even saying we don't have any responsive documents. And so, you know, it's pretty hard to get to the point of, if they, you know, of, well, what about the conversations? Because that's not really covered so much by FOIA.
No, it's not. And that's interesting because knowing these guys, they're not going to put that down on paper because the initial reaction out of the gate was so strong.
Oh, yeah.
When it was just floated. Because, again, they float stuff to see how it's received, where it lands, and who it lands on, and all of that good stuff. And then they decide whether or not to go full throttle implementation. I thought the DNC chair, Ken Martin, in a tweet summed it up best for me. He said, quote, "We already know Trump wants to cheat his way through the midterms. What we don't know is how far he's willing to go." I would submit we do know. We just sued the Trump administration to find out. Voter suppression and intimidation has no place in our country. We do know how far this administration will go because they've already started to go there in a little place called Georgia, now out in Arizona. So you're beginning to see across the country where they're putting their foot down. They're leaving a little footprint. They're not breadcrumbs. But they are part of a trail that we know is going to lead to November. And a lot of conversations around elections being, oh, my God, that didn't go right, therefore there was cheating. Or, oh, my God, we lost, therefore there was cheating. So the legal side being what it is, because all that's going to get appealed up. What is there anywhere in that process where the courts just go, look, this is a political problem, stop bringing this crap to us?
Well, I mean, it depends on what kind of case is brought, right? The FOIA case is completely governed by statute, right? And so that's not one that's going to be deemed political. If they ever do give a list of documents, they can certainly say some of these things we can withhold under exceptions to FOIA, and those are things like ongoing investigations, obviously classified information, and a whole lot of exceptions. And then you can argue and litigate over that. If there's other litigations, like let's say there actually are deployments near polling places, and maybe then you've got people that run into court, then you might be able to get some discovery and maybe get some of the things, depositions of people asking, did you have conversations about these things? Did you have meetings about these things? And dig down in. I think when it comes to troops or just armed men, both of these things are unlawful under federal law. We cannot have armed federal agents at polling places unless it's to respond to an actual, like, attack on the U.S., right? Which makes sense. So that includes ICE, that includes CBP, that includes FBI, that includes Secret Service, that includes, and so that's not, those should not be political questions.
Okay, can I flip the script real quick on something you said? Of course, the lawyer side of my brain just kicked in. Okay, so FOIA, the federal department, fill in the blank. We know they've got agents in various states around the country. What can we do at the state level to see that you are plant, you've been there now for a year gathering, stuff? Is there a way to go through that door as opposed to just the federal door to get a better view of the landscape of exactly what the plan potentially could be? Because they're talking to someone on the ground. There are people on the ground in various, secretaries of state's offices or county boards of election that are identifying where you need to send those troops.
There are state the equivalent of FOIA, which are public records request laws in every state. And so that means if the communications between the federal government official were with any state official, county official, city official, usually that state law would cover that. And I will tell you, in my own experience, states or counties or local jurisdictions are often quicker to respond to public records requests than the federal government is. And by quicker. I mean, like within sometimes days. And so it's a good strategy to see what might be there. But that's only going to get you what they're communicating to local officials.
That's
so it's going to be, it's going to be friendly officials, right? Friendly officials that you're going to be looking for.
We're only a week out from Texas. And we talk a lot about polling, troops at polling places. Look what happened last week in Texas. Confusion, chaos agents. Websites weren't updated. People didn't know what precinct they were supposed to go to. I would argue that there was probably some intention on that from the people who changed the laws in Texas and whatnot. Talk about what can be done regarding things of that manner, because we saw it ended up not mattering so much because of Tallarico's margins against Crockett. But you had one judge saying, no, we have to extend the poll hours. And then another judge said, the Supreme Court says, no, get rid of it. That's chaos that the average voter looks at and goes, I don't have time for this. It's almost wearing them down to create a voter suppression.
And I think that, that is the reason behind last-minute changes like this. And it sounds like there were some pretty dramatic changes in how people got notice about, well, for the first time ever, it wasn't sort of general go to any place. You had these specific precincts and people didn't know where to go. And that's the kind of thing that does oftentimes result in emergency litigation. I think we're going to see some of these efforts, lots and lots. One thing I will say, though, is like, I said polling places is not the only problem. Just an ICE surge in the city, right? Even if they're not at polling places, is going to depress the vote.
McCord, as always, thank you so much for being with us. Next, polls are closed in Georgia, and Ali Velshi will join us at the big board with the latest on the race to fill Marjorie Taylor Greene's old House seat. Stay right here. You want to see that vest? Only on the Wet News.
The best in the vest.
Polls are now closed in the Georgia special election to fill former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene's House seat. It is a race that is testing the impact of the Trump endorsement. Candidates from all parties are on the same ballot, and if no one reaches 50% plus one, the top two candidates will advance to a runoff on April 7th. Let's check in with MS Now's chief data reporter, Ali Velshi, at the big board. What do you got for us, Ali?
I got results. I got a lot of stuff in right now in Georgia. Remember, this is not a primary. As you said, this is the special election. We have better than a third of the vote in right now, and it's an interesting development here. 44%, 43% is going to the Democrat, Sean Harris. This is the guy who lost to Marjorie Greene by more than 30% last election. Now, look, this is entirely possible that he's going to be the biggest vote getter tonight, largely because there are only a few Democrats running and there are a ton of Republicans. Here's how it looks for the Republicans. Clayton Fuller has got 32% of the vote right now. He is the Trump-endorsed candidate in this particular race. However, the guy with 8% of the vote right now, Colton Moore, is the Trumpier of the candidates. So it depends on what people in this fairly conservative district are looking for. Are they looking for Trump stuff, or are they looking for Trump-endorsed stuff, or are they looking to follow Marjorie Taylor Greene and object to the Trumpy nature of things? Here's where we are on the vote breakdown. Most of what you're seeing, about a third of the vote that we're already seeing, it's actually probably 35, 36% of the vote is in right now. Still mostly early and by mail. Very little of Election Day voting is in at the moment. I just want to tell you a little bit about the candidates. Sean Harris, the Democrat. By the way, he's at 44% of the vote. There is an outside chance he does well enough to win. It is not likely, but if he gets 50% plus one, he will fill out Marjorie Taylor Greene's term until the end of the year. Clayton Fuller, as I said, he's the Trump-endorsed candidate. Colton Moore is the more Trumpy of the candidates. You can see a number of Republicans here. Jim Davis getting about 16.6% of the vote. He's also running as a Democrat, same as Jonathan Hobbs. He's got less than 1% of the vote. And given that you've got Luke there, I'm going to just introduce you to one of the candidates here, Andrew Underwood, who is sporting mutton chops for the first time since 1886. So we're going to keep a close eye on this. We're watching Mississippi, too, and there's an interesting race there with Benny Thompson being challenged by someone in his district, and Benny Thompson hasn't been challenged since about 2006 in any meaningful way, but we're keeping a very, very close eye on the northwest part of Georgia, Georgia 14.
Wasn't sure where you were going with that Luke shout out. I thought maybe there was a Buffalo Bills fan somewhere deep in Georgia. All right,
well, as a Toronto guy, I got to walk on. I got to skate carefully around that one.
Skate, not walk.
Ali Velshi,
that's right,
for us at the big board. Ali, thank you. Can you make the face to camera that you made to me when Ali said that there was the possibility that the Democrat could get 50 plus one?
Okay. Look, this is the weird cycle of election. You know, voters are the most unpredictable part of an election. They really are. At the end of the day, you can plan for a lot, you can presume a lot, parties assume a lot, and then voters vote. And given, I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene, I'm not going to go out on a limb and say, oh, the Democrats are going to win this district. But Marjorie Taylor Greene could be sort of the poster child for something that's happening within that MAGA-verse. And, maybe Sean Harris is an off-ramp for a cycle. I've been in elections where voters said, you know what, I'm going to give it to the other party for a cycle. We'll take it back in the next cycle. But right now, this is how we get off of stupid, right? This is how we get away from the crazy and reset. Who knows?
It'll be interesting to see. I mean, Harris is a former Marine general. He's run a campaign of essentially saying, I'm a pretty conservative guy, but I'm not part of this crazy that's been there before. I think there could be an appeal to that. Remember, Doug Jones won a Senate seat in Alabama when the other candidate was Roy Moore was terrible.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking.
I think where you go here, which is interesting to me, is if this does go to a runoff and you have this sort of month where a lot of money will be poured into it, it will be a good way to measure how the disillusioned Republican vote. And you know what that feels like, right? Yep. The disillusioned Republican vote, which is something that a guy like Ossoff, down the line, statewide, I think we'll hone in on and say, okay, what is there for the taking in these midterms? It could tell us a lot about how the level of disgust.
And I would label that, Alicia, the Marjorie Taylor Greene vote, that disillusioned Republican vote. I mean, because at the end of the day, MAGA or otherwise, it's still a Republican vote in Georgia.
Who would have thought MTG?
This man trademarking things left and right. I love it. All right, up next on All In, Chris is going to sit down with Senator Andy Kim to discuss the war with Iran. That is 8 o'clock Eastern right here on MS Now. We're going to be right back.
Tonight on All In.
It just seems so insane based on what he ran on. I mean, this is why a lot of people feel betrayed, right?
The president's plan to have it all.
Thank you. Mr. President, you've said the war is, quote, very complete, but your defense secretary says this is just the beginning. So which is it, and how long should Americans be prepared?
Well, I think you could say it both.
Tonight, Trump flails as his quick war with Iran stalls, and Paul Krugman on damage it's doing to the economy.
I knew oil prices would go up if I did this, and they've gone up probably less than I thought they'd go up.
Then, special election night. Are the voters in Marjorie Taylor Greene's district as disillusioned as she is?
We need to have a serious conversation about what the f*** is happening to this country.
And Carol Leonnig on her new reporting on a counter-terror exodus at the FBI and the DOJ push to overthrow the Cuban government.
The liberation of Cuba is upon us. It's just a matter of time now.
But All In starts right now. Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. We are on day 11 of Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu's war with Iran. A war of choice launched with constantly shifting rationale, sometimes even minute to minute, and now mired in obfuscation and lies. This week, Donald Trump ran into the fundamental strategic contradiction at the heart of this war. It keeps presenting itself over and over. Donald Trump wants a war with Iran, a big military victory and regime change, and he also wants to keep gas prices low. And guess what? You can only have, at most, one of the two, and, well, possibly neither. That has left this administration in something of a bind. On Saturday, Israel struck 30 Iranian fuel depots, creating an environmental and political catastrophe. The scenes throughout the country were downright apocalyptic. Major fires breaking out across the capital of Tehran, one of the largest cities in the world, the largest city in Iran. An anonymous Trump staffer went to Axios to vent about the attack, which the United States had advanced knowledge of. Quote, the president doesn't like the attack. He wants to save the oil. He doesn't want to burn it. And it reminds people of higher gas prices. Probably true. Lindsey Graham also had some diplomatically stern words for our Israeli allies. Over the weekend, the price of a barrel of oil spiked to nearly $120. That's a lot. Trump went into spin mode, trying to manage the market. He called CBS News during the day on Monday to say, quote, I think the war is very complete, comma, pretty much. It seems an obvious attempt to calm the panic on Wall Street, which is also seeing a stock sell-off as investors are worried about what's going to happen. And then markets close at 5. he goes back out to the cameras to kind of walk it back.
We've already won in many ways, but we haven't won enough. We go forward more determined than ever to achieve ultimate victory that will end this long-running danger once and for all. 47 years, it should have been done a long time ago.
We've already won in many ways, but we haven't won enough. Meanwhile, the flow of commerce through the Strait of Hormuz has effectively stopped. That's where an enormous portion of the world's oil traffic goes. Iran has effectively shut it down. It has attacked ships that try to travel through that key choke point in the Gulf. The key choke point that, like, if you were to take a class on the geopolitics of oil or previous oil crises or, strategically relevant straits in the world, day one's going to be the Strait of Hormuz, right? Trump just thinks, though, that everyone needs to just grow a spine.
Brian, you did a phone interview with the President of the United States. What is his read on this?
Here's exactly what he said. These ships should go through the Strait of Hormuz and show some guts. There's nothing to be afraid of. They have no Navy. We sunk all their ships.
Well, that's not quite true. There's just news today that we sunk 16 ships just in the last 20 minutes. We're going to get to that. So clearly they still have ships. And then when speaking in public, Trump, guess what? Backed down, as he so often does.
Because you have to keep the straits flowing. With all of that, it affects other countries much more than it does the United States. It doesn't really affect us. We have so much oil. We have tremendous oil and gas, much more than we need.
You keep seeing it over and over again, right? Like that old cartoon meme of the guy who's like sweating between pushing two buttons, right? It's like, keep gas prices low, have a long enough war to get regime change. So this all weirdly escalated to Trump's Secretary of Energy. Today, this is what happened. I don't know if you saw this, but this is wild. So Chris Wright is his name, former energy executive, fossil fuel company executive, whose, by the way, purview has very little to do with oil prices. But he announced that the Navy might step in to escort those ships through the very dangerous strait.
You don't think Navy escorts of vessels are necessary?
Oh, they might be. They might be. There could be. Their early tankers probably will involve some direct protection by the U.S. military. But most important is to defang their ability to threaten these ships.
Now, just take a second to sit with that. That was him, of course, on Sunday, right? Sort of starting to lay the groundwork for this idea, raise the possibility. And be clear, it's a huge deal. I mean, just think about it for a second. Look at this map. Those ships are in range of Iranian missiles. And so this would mean commanding American service members in boats to risk their lives to escort ships bringing tankers full of oil to God knows where, another country? Like, should our troops die for lower oil prices? Quite literally. Should they sacrifice their lives? Should they be maimed and killed and maybe drown in the ocean or be incinerated so that some shipment from Aramco can go to India? You think so? And then get this, today Secretary Wright actually tweeted that it was happening, okay? Lays the groundwork on Sunday, and today the big announcement in a tweet, the U.S. had escorted a ship, successfully escorted an oil tanker through the Strait of Hormuz. Wow. Putting our, I guess, money where our mouth is, so to speak. And as you might imagine, markets responded positively. It was like, oh, they're going to reopen the Strait of Hormuz by, escorting ships through, and the price of oil dropped. And then Wright deleted the post because it turns out it wasn't true.
I know the post was taken down pretty quickly, and I can confirm that the U.S. Navy has not escorted a tanker or a vessel at this time, though, of course, that's an option the president has said he will absolutely utilize if and when necessary at the appropriate time.
Well, that's a pretty big mistake. That's pretty different, escorting ships or not. Which leads us back where we started on that front. Reports today of possible Iranian mine deployment in the Strait. Trump angrily posting warnings not to. News in the last 20 minutes that we have been targeting Iranian mining ships, the U.S. claiming they've sunk 16 of them. And we're nearly 2 weeks in this war that has sprawled now to more than a dozen countries. We got word today of an 8th U.S. service member who has died, along with more than 1,200 Iranians. 570 Lebanese, by the way, in the south of Lebanon, where Israel has gone into that country yet again, and 13 Israelis have lost their lives. And there's no clear way out. Of course, Iran has very little reason to trust the president, and now Republican Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, a guy who, by his own admission, helped goad Donald Trump into this war, is publicly advocating for it to explode into a wider, full-fledged regional conflict.
To our Arab friends, I've tried to help you construct a new Mideast. You need to up your game here. I can't go to South Carolina and say we're fighting and you won't publicly fight. What you're doing behind the scenes, that has to stop. The double dealing of the Arab world when it comes to this stuff needs to end. I go back to South Carolina, I'm asking them to send their sons and daughters over to the Mideast. What I want you to do in the Mideast, our friends in Saudi Arabia and other places, step forward and say, this is my fight too. I join America. I'm publicly involved in bringing this regime down. If you don't, you're making a great mistake and you're going to cut off the ability to have a better relationship with the United States.
I mean, I'm not an expert in the region at all, or a diplomat for the region at all. But you might think they might say to Lindsey Graham, you know, we got to live here, actually. In remarks today, a spokesperson for the Qatari Foreign Ministry took the U.S. to task for already sparking a regional conflict.
Right now, as we speak, you can put a map of the region in front of you, and you will not be able to find a finger-pointing space where escalation is not happening. This is exactly what we have said from day one. This is the biggest I told you so in the history of I told you so's in the world. We have said from day one, left unchecked, the escalation that started in 2023 would lead to a regional war. What we are seeing right now is a regional war that still can be contained, but the trajectory we are going through right now is a very dangerous trajectory for the region, and we keep warning that, again, this left unchecked and conflict moved from negotiation rooms to battlefields will lead to even more catastrophic results for the people of the region.
The concept of the Gulf cooperation countries joining the fight actively feels, let's just say, rather unlikely at this point, and it surely doesn't help the case for the U.S. for regional allies to join the fight when the U.S., on the very first day of this war, bombed a girls' elementary school, killing nearly 200 students and staff. Analysis of the attack shows that it was likely a Tomahawk cruise missile that struck the school. As of now, 3 countries have Tomahawk missiles: the U.S., Australia, and the U.K. Widespread analysis by a number of news organizations indicates it was our bomb. In fact, the New York Times published photos of weapons debris from the attack. One remnant is labeled, quote, "Made in USA." The Pentagon says it is still investigating the attack, but is also, at this point, almost certainly knows it was our bomb. Donald Trump, meanwhile, says Iran bombed itself.
Did the United States bomb a girls' elementary school in southern Iran on the first day of the war?
No, in my opinion, based on what I've seen, that was done by Iran.
Is that true, Mr. Nixon? Was Iran to do that?
Certainly investigated.
You just suggested that Iran somehow got its hands on a Tomahawk and bombed its own elementary school on the first day of the war. But you're the only person in your government saying this. Even your defense secretary wouldn't say that when he was asked, standing over your shoulder on your plane on Saturday. Why are you the only person saying this?
Because I just don't know enough about it. I think it's something that I was told is under investigation. But Tomahawks are used by others, as you know. Numerous other nations have Tomahawks. They buy them from us. But I will certainly, whatever the report shows, I'm willing to live with that report.
Oh, really? Other nations buy Tomahawks from us? Did we sell Iran Tomahawks, Mr. President? Iran does not have Tomahawk missiles. Iran does not have the capability to use Tomahawk missiles. He's lying about civilian strikes as audaciously as Vladimir Putin would, just as he has lied about nearly every aspect of this war of choice. Senator Andy Kim's a Democrat in New Jersey, previously served as the White House National Security Counsel at the Pentagon, acting as a civilian advisor to generals in Afghanistan, and he joins me now. And Senator, I was seeing that you had formed actually a caucus in the Senate based on, and in Congress based on your experience at the NSC and the Pentagon in minimizing civilian harm in wars. In fact, there was an office that was tasked with that has effectively been shuttered and gutted by Pete Hegseth. Given that as something that you've pursued in your policy, like, what is your reaction having the president suggest that Iran bombed its own school rather than taking responsibility?
Yeah, Chris. Well, let's call this what it is, which is a cover-up. You know, this is a cover-up by the president to try to change the subject, try not to have the Americans understand the costs of war. You're right. I was I was an advisor embedded with the military in Afghanistan. I worked on the counter-ISIS fight. I've seen our military in terms of how they try to calculate civilian casualties. And I worked with my fellow members in Congress to set up a civilian protection center within the Department of Defense. This was something that was meant to try to avoid exactly this scenario of planning, of testing, and reviewing targets for civilian casualties. What did Secretary Hegseth and the Trump administration do? They shuttered this center. They gutted it. They have made it and rendered it absolutely inert here. And so, this is something that the Trump administration owns. They clearly deprioritized it, and they're now involved in an absolute cover-up to try to hide their tracks here.
Members of the Armed Services Committee in the Senate today were briefed today, and some of your Democratic colleagues came out saying one of their takeaways in the briefing, aside from the kind of incoherence of the justifications, was that they are thinking very seriously about putting ground troops in. Zateo's had some reporting saying that Trump is dangerously close to sending troops to Iran. There's been some other indications of that. How worried are you about that being the next step here?
I'm incredibly worried about this. This president has shown such disregard for the safety of our service members. And I heard Secretary Hegseth say this directly in a briefing that I was in, where he said he will not rule it out. And that, this is something that they are considering. And I just think that that is absolutely reckless. The American people deserve to be told to their face that they are not going to see Americans on the ground in Iran. When we see this administration and the lack of planning that they had, the risk that they've thrown our service members into, for instance, the 6 service members killed in Kuwait. This was by all accounts, a makeshift operation center. It was not a hardened structure from above. It did not have, a fully operational warning system for attacks. And what did we see? We saw an attack directly upon them and 6 service members killed. There should be more of an investigation in this. I think that this administration has tried to downplay the lack of security protocols that they had there. And then, so the idea that we would have boots on the ground where service members would be even more exposed, that Iran would know exactly where our service members would be and have a greater ability to be able to strike them and attack them. Like I said, I was in Afghanistan and Iraq. I saw that the vast majority of Americans killed by Iranian agents were through IEDs, through these different types of attacks based on Americans on the ground. It was not ballistic missiles that was the #1 killer of Americans by Iran. It was these attacks on the ground, and our service members would be absolutely exposed.
Today, Democrats, I believe, sent letters from the Senate saying that they're demanding Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio testify on this war, to come before the committee. And it's just sort of an obvious move, but it is also striking to me that there's been background briefings, and Hegseth has gone to his very strange and surreal hand-picked Pentagon, press corps, who he's gotten kind of testy with, even though they're all essentially pro-Trump folks. It's crazy that we haven't had anyone come before Congress and explain what's going on, right? Do you think that should happen? Is it going to happen?
I hope the American people demand this because they deserve to have the answers. Just again, the level of disregard from this president to the American people. That we have, numerous service members killed now. We have billions of dollars being sent into this war effort, whereas we're being told by this administration we don't have enough money for your health care, for your groceries, for what you need to be able to live your life. The American people deserve this. So, yes, I hope the American people, and certainly all of us in Congress, are going to be demanding public hearings to have some transparency and accountability here. I'm just sick and tired of this administration hiding behind these classified briefings. The vast majority of what I hear in these classified briefings can be said publicly, but they intentionally do this as a tactic to be able to prevent the American people from hearing and questioning what it is that they're doing. Because, the reason why, Chris, is because this administration knows that the American people are not with them. They know that the American people do not want a war, and they want to see instead a government focus on lowering their cost of living, affordability, and other things, which this president not only is ignoring, but is making matters worse right now.
Senator Andy Kim of New Jersey, thank you so much for making some time for us tonight.
Thanks, Chris.
Coming up, we have an interesting update on the race to replace Marjorie Taylor Greene in Georgia. Ali Velshi, there he is. He's working at the big board. We will have results for you next. Once again, it's a Tuesday and it's an election night in America. Georgia voters cast their ballots today in a special election in a very special district, the 14th district, where they're looking to replace former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who very abruptly announced her retirement over Donald Trump's handling of the Jeffrey Epstein files last year. Now, as polls have closed, we actually have some results, and Ali Velshi, the MS Now chief data reporter, joins me at the board with what those results are. Ali, what do we got?
We've got interesting stuff going on in Georgia 14. We've got about 55% of the vote in right now, and it has advanced to a runoff. This is what we expected because in most southern states, you have to get 50% or more to advance. This will be a vote on April 7th now, and that'll be just to finish out Marjorie Taylor Greene's term until the end of the year. This is also expected. The highest vote getter is a Democrat. This is Sean Harris, who's overperforming what he got when he ran against Marjorie Taylor Greene in the last general election. There are only 3 Democratic candidates here, so when you add that up, he's at about 43, 44%. There are 11 Republicans running. Clayton Fuller is the Republican who was endorsed by Donald Trump, which is kind of interesting because Colton Moore, who's coming in third with 11%, is the Trumpier of the candidates. So the bottom line is these two are going to face off with each other, and what you're looking at is about 43.5% in total for Democrats and about 56% in total for Republicans, which, Chris, follows with this idea of Democrats losing by less and winning by more. There's a little bit of outside betting that a guy like Sean Harris could win. That's not likely. Clayton Fuller is likely to be the one to win. But Sean Harris is outperforming not just in this redistricted area where a piece of Cobb County, which is an Atlanta suburb, is in. He's actually outperforming in other parts of the state. So this is a very interesting weather vane for what's going to go on. There's not a lot of people who think this is a district that would flip for Democrats, but that may not be what matters in the general election.
Right. So we're looking at, like, Trump carried it by 30 points, right? And right now, if you add up Republicans and Democrats, you're going to look at something like, as of now, Republicans winning by 13, 14 points, all Democratic candidates, all Republican candidates. If you think those consolidate in a special runoff, and you're there, you're looking at something in the 17-point overperformance.
Correct, which is in keeping. It's actually a little lower than some places in the South, but it's in keeping with what we're seeing.
All right, Ali Velshi, thank you so much for that. Joining me now, Corbin Trent, Democratic strategist and consultant who served as communications director for Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Michelle Goldberg, who's an opinion columnist for the New York Times. Obviously, like, we don't have full results yet, and special elections are a special thing that Democrats do very well because they have captured higher and higher shares of what we might call real freaks, like people that really pay attention and are high propensity voters. All of that said, however, Corbin, given the fact that this is one of the most vocal diehard Trump politicos in the country who turned on him, leaves Congress, I am looking at what those final numbers are, both here and the runoff, to see how much of a problem they have.
Well, I mean, I think the other thing to look at is there was 4.3 million, I think, that went to getting those votes, right? And, yeah, I mean, I was just watching a race not that long ago, a few months ago in Tennessee. Tennessee 7, another special election. And that was an overperformance by, I think, very similar numbers, 17. So what I think this is going to have to do with is these seats that looked sort of unflippable, that were like +7, +8, that's the ones that are really going to be important, I think, in 2026.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? Because you've got the like very small handful of like what we know are contested, +1, +2.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's like, what are there, like 11, only 11 seats, I think, that were carried by Harris that Republicans represent, something like that.
Yes.
So those we know, right? It's that outer run next up that is the.
And I think there's a few more of those because of Republican redistricting.
Yes. Yes, in fact, they've created some more R+7, particularly in Texas.
That arrogance, actually, that they went in and carving up these districts. They'd almost got them in Tennessee. They carved up Tennessee 5 into 3 separate districts, and I think they're going to see that play out all across the country, is that their arrogance is sort of overplayed.
Yes, they went in and they got rid of Nashville having their own member of Congress so they could diffuse all the urban voters. Yeah. Speaking of Texas, this is my favorite election story so far. So it's going to be a runoff between the Attorney General Ken Paxton, who again is almost comically corrupt, and you know, has an incredible sort of rap sheet, and the sitting incumbent John Cornyn. Okay,
it's a rap sheet. It's actually a rap sheet.
No, he's actually been invited.
Someone who was impeached by Republicans.
By Republicans, right? Yeah. So here's what happened. So it goes to runoff. They've already spent tons of money on this race. Trump declined to endorse in the first round of the primary. Now Trump comes out the day after and says, I'm putting an end to it. I'm going to endorse shortly, and the person should drop out. That was a week ago. That endorsement has not been forthcoming. In the interim, here is some polling, okay? If Trump were to endorse Cornyn, you've still got Paxton winning in the race, right? That's if he endorses Cornyn. And if he endorses Paxton, he would basically end it, right?
Yeah.
Because clearly there's a bunch of voters who voted for Wesley Hunt, who was also a Trumpy character last time, who are MAGA voters who like Donald Trump and don't like Cornyn and want to vote for Paxton. And they desperately want Donald Trump to weigh in. But he's looking at this polling and thinking to himself, if I do make this endorsement and then lose, what does that say about me?
Right. Then it's humiliating. And I think that, I think Donald Trump can be a kingmaker for a more moderate candidate running against a more conservative candidate, but kind of he can't, or at times. But in a race like this where John Cornyn is so unpopular in Texas, the only thing
he's like 30 points underwater in the same poll in favorability.
Right. And so Donald Trump, if he kind of tries to put him over the top, he spends some of his own political capital, he embarrasses himself, and Ken Paxton wins anyway. I mean, Ken Paxton is still going to be a reliable vote for Donald Trump, but he's just kind of showed the world that he doesn't control the Republican Party as much, or at least as much as he thinks he does.
And I think Trump's, his superpower was knowing what his base wants, talking to his base, but then moving with them in the same direction.
Yeah.
I think trying to totally change
he
doesn't have that capacity to move them in a whole different direction. And, and I think the people around him are really overestimating how bad a Paxton election would be. I think people really think, Paxton and Tallarico's going to take him down, but the polling doesn't say so.
No,
it's not like a given.
The poll shows him losing or the polls show that Tallarico, I think, would rather run against Paxton.
But it's basically a dead heat.
Right.
It's a margin of error.
Right. I mean, I think Tallarico is kind of the underdog no matter what, but it just seems like, he actually...
If you could choose.
Right.
Although there's an argument I've heard from Texans that is that Cornyn is so sort of unpopular in the state, and so that if you have a Cornyn-Tallarico race, it's a clearer sort of like new, fresh, I'm coming against Washington versus Washington, whereas if you get Paxton, you have the comical levels of corruption, but at least I'm also an outsider,
But this whole MAGA thing is built on comical levels of corruption.
Yeah, right.
They're really just they're really unmasking the whole thing and going for it. So I think Paxton would be a great fit.
Well, what's funny too, right, is that what I love about this primary, I mean, they're talking about dropping like tens of millions, maybe $100 million on the runoff, to be clear. The sort of Republican Senate campaign, official arm, to keep Cornyn and Paxton out, is that Cornyn's been going after him for basically he's a scoundrel. He cheated on his wife. And it's like, I don't know, man. I mean, there was a time where that seemed to work in politics, but really, you think that's going to work in a runoff in the Republican Party?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Obviously, adultery is not a deal breaker for the Republican Party. I mean, you have people in Congress right now who, not only cheated on their wife. You had recently somebody who sexually harassed a member of his staff, and she set herself on fire.
Yeah.
You have a congressman in Florida.
And by the way, he won the first round of that primary, to be clear.
Yes, and actually has now, it looks like, is going to step aside for somebody who has his own edition of Mein Kampf. But, you have somebody in Florida, Corey Mills, who has just sex scandal on top of sex scandal. Yes, there are no standards in the Republican Party. I do think, again, Ken Paxton was impeached by Republicans. There are Republicans in Texas who know who he is and find it unacceptable. It's just that that's a harder argument to make, that kind of corruption is a deal breaker in Donald Trump's Republican Party.
Yeah.
But have you seen him own the libs on TV?
Well, he's not even that good at that, is he?
Well,
Corbin
he gets
Trent,
a lot of clips.
Corbin Trent, and Michelle Goldberg, great to have you. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
All right, still ahead, as Donald Trump sends oil prices on a wild ride, Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman on what it all means for you. Next. We are nearly 2 weeks into Donald Trump's war on Iran. Oil prices are spiking, up nearly 40% since the start of the year, with predictions of a possible recession. Interesting stat I saw today from Bloomberg Economics, which estimates that an oil price of $83 a barrel is the break-even point for whatever tax refunds might come through to Americans through Trump and the Republicans' big mega bill, which is already skewed towards billionaires. Meaning, if oil's that high, 83 a barrel, it wipes out dollar for dollar, all of the already meager benefits of the tax cuts that would have flowed to people. As a Bloomberg reporter writes, if oil exceeds that, currently the case, higher gasoline prices would more than drown out the gains from refunds. Paul Krugman is a Nobel Prize-winning economist. He's also currently Distinguished Professor of Economics at the Graduate Center of the City of New York and author of the Substack blog, Krugman Wonks Out, and he joins me now. It's great to have you, Professor. What is your read, I guess, top line on the kind of macroeconomic, global economic reverberations of the big supply shock we're seeing right now with oil?
Okay, this is potentially really terrible. The current price is still assuming, basically, traders are assuming that this will not go on more than another week or two. If it goes on longer, then this is 20% of the world's oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz. And there's really no other way for it to get to where it can be used. So, and that's enormous. That's a much bigger shock to world oil supplies than the oil shocks of the 1970s. This is just a gigantic disruption to world energy supplies. And the price can go easily much, much higher than where it is now if it's sustained. I mean, this is basically impossible. And that's nasty. Now, the world is less oil dependent than it was in the 1970s. The U.S. economy is about 4 times as big as it was in 1973, but we burn about the same amount of oil. So we're less exposed to that, but it's still, this is, if you were going to concoct a recipe for somehow revisiting all of the bad things of the past 60 years of U.S. economic history, it would be what's happening right now.
I was thinking about having you on, I think, a year ago when the so-called Liberation Day was announced, in which the president slapped tariffs on every country on earth, including a few uninhabited islands and places like Madagascar that only export basically vanilla. And, one of the tricky things about the politics of inflation and how it intersects with the political economy inflation is that generally presidents don't have a ton of control over the price level, which is why it's so bedeviling, right? The Fed is sort of there to deal with the price level, and they can raise rates or whatever. But in this case, it really is the case that a guy that ran on lowering prices, the 2 biggest actions he's taken of macroeconomic impact, slapping a ton of tariffs on unilaterally and starting a war unilaterally, you kind of couldn't come up with another way to unilaterally raise prices other than those 2.
Yeah, there are very, particularly, price of oil, price of gasoline. Presidents get blamed constantly, and yet they have no influence on it normally. But start a war that threatens to, cut off the world's supply of oil, that'll do it.
So that's
and all indications are that they didn't think about it. They just assumed that this would all be over, and they, install a puppet government. And wow.
You've also got Trump's sort of obsession with oil prices as the means of regulating prices, right? So he would get asked in the campaign about bringing down prices for anything, and he would say, we're going to drill, baby, drill. He's got something today about some new refinery capacity in Texas, which actually started in 2024 before he became president. He is obsessed with this, and the bet that the markets are making is the same bet they made with Liberation Day and with each new successive introduction of the tariffs, which is taco. Trump always chickens out, and when he's just not going to abide oil at $5 a gallon. Now, that's not an economic question for a Nobel Prize winner like yourself. It's essentially the psychology of one man, but I do wonder what you think of that.
Well, I mean, again, who knows? It's got to be warring emotions. On the one hand, Trump is horrified, presumably, by the political fallout that's developing. On the other hand, he has to win. He cannot accept a loss, and it's very hard to spin leaving that Iranian regime in place, just as anything but a loss. He'll try, but the thing that's really important, I think, here is to understand that we don't get to decide when this is over. There's actually 3 players here. There's the United States, there's Israel, and there's the Iranians. And the new supreme leader of Iran is a fanatic. He's an extremist. He hates America, and we just killed his family. And saying, okay, it's over. Sorry about that. We're going to declare victory and pull out, and assuming that the Iranians stop launching drone attacks on their neighbors, that they allow free traffic of tankers through the strait. That's not a very good assumption to be making. And it's kind of, generally, this idea that the world revolves entirely around America that's part of the drill, baby, drill. The idea was that by increasing oil production in the United States, we could make everything great. But, we're an important player in the world energy scene, but not the only one. And this war, wars there's at least two sides to a war. In this case, there's three, and it's not something where you can just make it go away.
Yeah, in fact, there's some reporting in The Guardian I saw today, which we have not confirmed independently at MS Now, that the Iranians have rebuffed 2 attempts by Steve Witkoff, the president's personal sort of emissary, to sort of talk about, a ceasefire, de-escalation. And they're making a calculation that there has to be, they can't just sort of call it quits at this point because, the Americans and Israelis will just come back in another few months. So your point there about, the U.S. doesn't unilaterally get to decide when the oil flows seems quite apt.
Yeah, and there's just a whole bunch of things here. I mean, of the various things that you really don't want to get into a shooting war around, there's nothing I can think of as vulnerable a target as an oil tanker. I mean, this is an incredibly fragile form of international trade that we tremendously depend upon, that the world tremendously depends on. We don't get oil these days from the Persian Gulf, but it doesn't matter. It's a global market. And yeah, I have been, the way the market is pops up and the oil price plunges every time there's a hint that, we're going to taco. I think that's I'm not an oil trader, but that seems to me to be wildly optimistic.
Yeah, and spare a thought for the Asian economies that are going to get really hammered by this and have basically done nothing to do any of this. Paul Krugman, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Still to come, the Trump plan to use the Department of Justice to go after Cuba's leaders. The next regime change target. Carol Leonnig joins me right here next. Donald Trump's administration has no clear or certainly not articulated plan for what we're doing in Iran. Just yesterday, Trump said the war was, quote, very complete, while his Defense Department in the same day said this is just the beginning. Who's right? Who knows? But it is clear that they are already plotting the next foreign military adventure, this time against Cuba. Trump and his allies have been teasing it publicly and repeatedly.
I'm not looking for a fair fight. If we get in a fight, I want to win it. I want to win it quick. I'm in Miami. You see this hat? Free Cuba. Stay tuned. Yep. The liberation of Cuba is upon us. It's just a matter of time now. We're marching through the world where Iran is going down and Cuba is next.
It's not just talk. Our own reporting shows that an arm of the Justice Department has been running a quiet operation in Miami over the past several weeks to find criminal charges they could bring against Cuba's top leaders, an effort which could help propel a change in Cuba's leadership. Carol Leonnig is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and is now senior investigative reporter. She's the co-author of Injustice, How Politics and Fear Vanquished America's Justice Department, and she joins me now. So nice to have you here in person.
Great to be with you, Chris.
You tell me a little bit of your reporting about what the DOJ is up to vis-a-vis the Cuban government.
So for some weeks before we reported this, sources of ours were telling us that senior members of the Deputy Attorney General's office were conferring with prosecutors in Miami, the Southern District of Florida, the U.S. Attorney's Office there, conferring with them about the possibility of bringing charges against top leaders of Cuba's government. That could mean the president, or that could mean the de facto leader of the Communist Party, a very elderly Raul Castro. What was fascinating was, and when we finally did report this, was when we got these materials that showed the Southern District of Florida U.S. Attorney actually explained to a new task force he was creating around February 19th. We have an urgent mission, I'm paraphrasing a little, to find prosecutable crimes of these individuals. And that just rang so hollow to me because the Department of Justice doesn't pick a target and then say, let's find some crimes. But that was the format of this message. And it was clear that it's urgent, right? Why is it urgent? The next day, the president said, Cuba's next.
And we should say that this is the game plan they used with Nicolás Maduro. I mean, in this kind of bizarre way in which, we've been striking boats in the Caribbean and saying it's war, not law enforcement. When we actually decapitated the regime and kidnapped the leader, we said it's law enforcement, not war, right? So clearly they think, let's just rerun the Maduro play, right?
Totally. You've totally nailed it and said it better than I could. Absolutely, this is a copy of we have criminal reasons to go after Mr. Maduro, and now we will also use the military to invade his personal capital and in Caracas, and we will seize him and his wife and pull them out. You know, a lot of people killed and injured on the way. In the case of Cuba, though, one of our reporters at MS Now, who I asked a little bit about this, conferring with this White House reporter, hey, what are you hearing about the White House wanting to have regime change in Cuba? And that reporter, Jake Traylor, found that in the White House, 2 weeks before this task force was formed by the U.S. Attorney in Florida, White House aides were complaining that they were worried they couldn't find a crime. Essentially, they couldn't run the Maduro playbook. And then this task force is created.
I mean, you know, there's an old apocryphal saying attributed to Stalin, and I think it was actually Beria, one of his lieutenants, that said, you know, show me the man, I'll show you the crime, right? That this is not the way it's supposed to work. I also feel like I should put my parenting cap on and say you're not allowed to start another war until you finish the war you have.
Well, Trump copied you a little on that, right? I mean, he essentially said, we were going to wait a few weeks to tell you about Cuba. Wait till we get this one done.
Yeah, he said to Dan Abash, you know, we're very focused on Iran when he interrupts himself. There's another bit of really worrying reporting that relates to the current war effort, which is about counterintelligence and counterterrorism in the U.S. government, the Justice Department, FBI. That Kash Patel had fired agents with expertise in Iran, like specifically counterterrorism expertise in Iran, which is a country that has sent agents to different countries to pull off attacks in the past. And that the DOJ has been losing, in general, experienced counterterrorism minds at this critical time. You've been hearing from folks in the department.
Yeah, I think the two blockbuster sort of factoids for your viewers and everyone in the American public are these. One, 300 FBI agents with national security expertise have either been fired, removed, or walked themselves out of disgust with the way this agency is being run, concern about the chaos under Kash Patel's leadership. The second biggie is that at the Department of Justice, half of the people who were in the counter-espionage unit, essentially this really important arm of the National Security Division, are gone. Now, we don't know...
Half?
Yeah. And this is the unit, I will just emphasize, that sort of intercepts when there is transnational repression efforts. That's a big word, a big phrase, rather, for saying operations where Iranians or other foreign adversaries find a way to get on U.S. soil and surveil dissidents here in the country. Often when they do that, they begin to morph into targeting Americans. And that unit has caught all sorts of Iranian spy plots, Iranian cyber hacks, Iranian murder-for-hire attempts. They participated in a very, very big investigation that found...
Targeting a dissident. Yeah.
Well, targeting a dissident, but morphing into surveilling Americans.
That is now, essentially, that unit is hollowed out.
Well, half strength, and the leader of it, who left in 2025, has been replaced with someone, through no fault of their own, but replaced with someone who has no counter-espionage experience. And, you know, these are sensitive jobs.
I'm sure Kash Patel is going to uncover the next plot in the next locker room that he invites himself into at Carol Leonnig. Thank you very much. Stay tuned, because in just a few minutes, Jen Psaki is speaking with Senator Adam Schiff. That's right here at 9 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be right back. That is All In on the Tuesday night. The briefing with Jen Psaki starts right now. Good evening, Jen.
Chris, it's really election season. I mean, it's happening.
It sure is.
You know? And something is happening in Georgia, which is pretty freaking exciting. And I love this time of year because voters, you actually see what they think.
I know, and it's also nice, like, it's like when you run experiments or where you have to, like, see what actually happens out in the world and you're not just theorizing, and you get to see results, and we're seeing, again, the numbers look like all indicators of incredible Democratic enthusiasm around the entire country.
Absolutely. I mean, this is an incredibly conservative district. We're going to talk to Sean Harris, who's the Democrat who's now in the runoff, in just a moment. But it's exciting to watch. More to come. We're just at the beginning, you know?
All right.
Pace yourself.
Yeah.
I'll see you tomorrow, Chris.
Good night, Jen.
Okay, there is a ton to get to tonight. I mean, the mixed messages coming from Donald Trump about his war with Iran reached new heights of absolute insanity today. And Senator Adam Schiff is standing by with his reaction to all of it. I'm going to talk through some of it myself, too. But I do want to start with what has been a fascinating election night in Georgia. I mean, today voters went to the polls to decide who will replace Marjorie Taylor Greene after she resigned from Congress, of course, last fall. And in normal times, I mean, the outcome of this election wouldn't really be a question. I mean, we might mention it, but we probably wouldn't be talking about it that much. I mean, this is a district that Marjorie Taylor Greene won by 29 points back when she was still a MAGA diehard. It is a very red, very Republican, very Trump-friendly district. It is drawn to be the most Republican district in the state of Georgia. And in just the past hour, we learned that the race is going to go to a runoff between Democrat Sean Harris and the Trump-endorsed Republican Clay Fuller. There's a lot of reasons for this. There were a lot of Republicans in the race, but there's no question Sean Harris way overperformed, and that's pretty exciting. Now, right now, Democrat Sean Harris is currently the lead vote getter and is outperforming Kamala Harris's 2024 performance in the district by very significant margins. And I should mention, and I just mentioned this to Chris, but again, Sean Harris is going to join me live in just a moment. First, let's get straight to MS Now's chief data reporter, Ali Velshi, in his special vest that we all love so much. He's standing by at the big board with the latest results. Okay, Ali, where do things stand right now?
Well, we got about 82% of the vote in, so we've been counting fast. As expected, Sean Harris and Clayton Fuller, as you said, have gone. They're going to a runoff. That'll be on April the 7th to fill the rest of Marjorie Taylor Greene's term, which is, to the end of this year, beginning of next year. They're still going to have a normal primary in May for the next election. But this is interesting because, as you said, Sean Harris is the biggest vote getter at the moment. It's very, very close at the moment. He's only ahead by about 1,600 votes, but he's at 37%. There are two other Democrats in the race, so add a couple of points to that for the Democratic vote. And again, that outperforms what Sean Harris did when he last ran against Marjorie Taylor Greene. The Clayton Fuller did get Donald Trump's endorsement, but Colton Moore is the guy who's sort of Trumpier than Clayton Fuller. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here. There are 11 Republicans running in this race, so that will obviously coalesce. But when you look at the numbers, you take all the Republican numbers put together, you do end up with a slightly weaker number than what Marjorie Taylor Greene got. So there's some level of enthusiasm. The district was also redistricted a little bit, and you can see it got a couple of parts of Cobb County in here, which is an Atlanta suburb. These are the Democratic strongholds around Atlanta. Sean Harris has performed very, very well there, but he's also performed very well in places around Rome, Georgia. He's performed in places that you wouldn't have actually thought that he was going to perform. The further northwest you get in this state, this top left corner is the most conservative, the Trumpiest part of the state. But this is a more competitive evening for Sean Harris and Democrats than history would suggest it would be. And I think that's very telling about this race tonight.
I know, so you're showing the county, or the area, sorry, the district right there on that map, and you mentioned some counties. Is there any counties that have stuck out to you as being sort of different from what you and the other data experts expected or maybe anticipated coming into tonight?
So Cobb, by the way, we got 83% of the vote in statewide. We only have about 55% of the vote in Cobb. And again, that's a place where you're expecting Sean Harris to do very well. So his lead has narrowed over the last hour, as I said, about 1,659 votes ahead of Clayton Fuller. But as the Cobb County vote comes in, you'll expect that to actually go up a little bit more. Paulding County next to it, he's doing particularly well there. The areas around Rome, Georgia, he's doing particularly well there. So he's holding his own in places that you wouldn't necessarily expect. You're seeing a lot of parts of northwestern Georgia that are underperforming what they did in the last election, overperforming for Sean Harris how Kamala Harris did in the last election. Again, as you go further northwest into the state and up to the Tennessee border, it gets a little bit trickier. It gets a little bit more conservative. But there's a county up here with a 37% of the population is a Hispanic population. It's a big manufacturing area. Again, Sean Harris is doing particularly well there. So we've got a bigger voter turnout than we expected, like we saw in Texas, and we've got more enthusiasm than you would expect. You'll remember there was a point when Marjorie Taylor Greene first ran, there wasn't a Democrat running against her at all. So Sean Harris has been the recipient of any Democratic enthusiasm or any frustrated Republican enthusiasm or any independent enthusiasm in this election. And again, this is not the same overperformance that you're seeing in some of the special elections that we've seen in the last few months, but it is it's a marginal overperformance, and it's an overperformance against Sean Harris's own performance in the last election. So positive trends for Democrats tonight in Georgia.
In the most conservative district in the state of Georgia.
Yeah.
So that's saying something. Ali Velshi, thank you as always. We're going to get right to the person you were just talking about, Sean Harris, who is the Democrat in the runoff right now. So joining me now is the Democratic candidate in Georgia's 14th congressional district. I should note, just for some of you out there who are just getting to know him and his name and who he is, he's a retired Army brigadier general who also served in Afghanistan, so quite a bio. What a night you're having. Let me just start by asking you, I mean, the district you're running in, it's mostly rural. I was just talking about this with Ali Velshi. It's drawn to be the reddest district in Georgia, which I'm just going to keep telling people because that is so telling in terms of how incredible it is that you're outperforming. But looking at the results so far, are you where you expected to be, or what did you expect to be coming into tonight?
Well, Jen, I will tell you, this is exactly where we thought we were going to be. The reality of it is, with this many people being in the race, I think it was 16, 17 of us running, we knew going into this race that it was going to be virtually impossible mathematically to get to that 50 plus 1%. But we also said internally to our team is, guess what? We want to make sure that tonight we win the election by getting the most votes. And we did that, and we're going to get even more votes as more votes come in later on tonight. So what it's basically saying is this, is that a coalition of Democrats, independents, and yes, Republicans can all get behind a candidate like me, and we can actually bring about change here in Northwest Georgia. And the reality of it is we're seeing that tonight. President Trump came down here 2 Thursdays ago. He was right here in Rome, Georgia, where I'm standing up tonight, and it made absolutely no difference. So the reality of it is tomorrow morning we get up, we start it all the way back over again, and then we actually win it on April 7th.
You've got a lot of hurdles to get to Congress, which I think you're very clear-eyed about, I'm sure, either this spring or in November. There's a runoff and then primaries and a campaign in this super Republican district. You better like campaigning because that's going to be what you're going to be doing for a while. The anti-Trump sentiment has definitely clearly grown in this district. But how have you, is there anything you've done to change your own strategy since you ran against Marjorie Taylor Greene the last time?
No, we didn't change our strategy. What we did was, after laying our strategy out against Marjorie Taylor Greene, you got to keep in mind, I got to give Marjorie credit. She's bigger than life. And when I ran last time, I was still Brigadier General Sean Harris, retired. I was rigid. Now I'm past that. I'm just a farmer here in Northwest Georgia raising cattle like everybody else. I don't have anything to lose, and the people now know me, they trust me, and they say, you know what, this is the only person in the race that's talking directly to me, talking about kitchen table issues, and he said very clearly that, hey, when I go to D.C., I'm a Democrat, but I'm not tied to a party where versus my opponent, the first thing comes out of his mouth is, I'm going to D.C. to help Donald Trump. When somebody tells you they're going to help Donald Trump, they basically say that everybody else in this district don't count. And Margie told us that from a long time ago, is that when she represented us, she's only represented MEGA, and all the rest of us didn't count. I'm the only candidate that's saying I want to represent everybody here in Northwest Georgia.
You may just be a farmer from Northwest Georgia, but you're also a retired brigadier general at a time where we're at war, and that is something that Marjorie Taylor Greene also criticized. Is that an issue that has come up on the campaign trail? Do you anticipate it being an issue as you proceed in this runoff?
Yes, it is an issue, and it's affecting several different ways. You know, in the rural community where we're at, many of our kids go into the military, and we have many of our kids from Northwest Georgia is probably in the Middle East. As you know, my background, my last assignment was Israel, so I actually clearly understand what's happening in the Middle East. Many of my friends are there. I know the commander of CENTCOM, but on top of all of that, I know what it means to be in a war. And the last thing I want to do is see another generation of fighting for something that we didn't have to get into. What I would say, Marjorie Taylor Greene and I both agree, but we agree on it on separate terms. One is this. I say that Donald Trump has put us in a war of choice. He chose to get in this war, and I said it 2 nights ago, and I said it again tonight. Donald Trump needs to come up on the net, talk directly to the American people, and tell us why we're in this war, how is it in our national interest, but on top of all that, how do we know that we win in it, and then how do we get out of it? Because we have a history of getting in wars, and they turn in forever.
I think that's something a lot of people who may not identify as Democrats probably agree with you on out there, according to the polling. Before I let you go, are you expecting for help from the Democratic Party? Do you want support from the National Democratic Party?
I'm already getting help from all 10 counties here locally. All the Democrats voted 100% for me. Obviously, I had 2 other gentlemen that were running as Democrats, but then the Georgia State Democratic Party actually also voted and supported me. What I'm saying to all the Democrats around the country and everybody around the country, support me in the best way that you can. However, I can't say that I need everybody from the Democratic Party to come here because I'm a realist. I live in Northwest Georgia. Even when I win this district, it will not be blue. It will be pink. Because what I've said to my Republican brothers and sisters is this: when you hire me, hold me responsible, and if I don't actually bring home results, then fire me. Nobody else would say that because guess what? That in my mind, that's why leadership matters, and that's why people are voting for me.
Sean Harris, thank you so much for joining me on quite a day for you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Again, as we were just discussing, the backdrop to another election night today in America is, of course, Donald Trump's war of choice in Iran. And right now, the entire planet is hanging on every word about that war that comes out of this administration, which is quite normal, because when there's a war, the president's the commander-in-chief. World leaders, both our allies and our foes, they're all watching. Energy CEOs are watching. And global oil markets that will determine the price of gas for the foreseeable future are reacting. American service members and their families wondering if they will get called up for duty in yet another Middle Eastern war, they're watching. Stock traders, shipping companies, airlines, Americans traveling stuck abroad who can't get home, and there are still many of them. Everyone is carefully scrutinizing every single sentence uttered by the Trump administration about what they can expect to happen next. And that's a problem, because everything this administration says about the war is a pile of hot, steaming, contradictory nonsense. I mean, just take Donald Trump's ever-evolving answer about how long this war will last. A pretty pivotal question. Yesterday, Trump gave a phone interview from his golf club in Doral, Florida, of course, in which he said, "I think the war is very complete," pretty much. I mean, great if true. And that offhand characterization, muttered over the phone from a golf resort, was enough to send sinking global stock markets into a sudden rally. Newspapers around the world blasted Trump's words in headlines as though this was a clear signal that this war with Iran would be ending very soon. And look, you should be able to take any president of the United States at his word. But just the previous day, Trump's own Secretary of Defense was saying this.
What I want your viewers to understand is this is only just the beginning.
That was the day before. This is only just the beginning. And that is obviously very different from the war is very complete pretty much. And incredibly, Hegseth and Trump actually gave those contradictory statements to the very same news network. So who are we all supposed to believe? Trump, who says the war is pretty much over, or Pete Hegseth, who says the war is just starting? Trump was asked by reporters about that very contradiction, and here's what he said.
You've said the war is, quote, very complete, but your defense secretary says this is just the beginning. So which is it, and how long should Americans be prepared
Well, I think
for
you could
this war
say
to
it
last?
both. We could call it a tremendous success right now as we leave here. I could call it, or we could go further, and we're going to go further.
It's both, everyone. Literally cannot be both. Maybe he ends it, maybe he doesn't. I mean, in other words, Trump's market-moving, international headline-making comments about the war being almost over were meaningless. It's just something that he randomly blurted out to a reporter on the phone from his golf course. It's the same with all of his messaging about this war. I mean, for days, Republicans have been tying themselves in knots over whether or not to call this a war. And they were kind of in a tough spot because Trump kept calling it a war.
We're doing very well on the war front. I have to go back and look at the war. You know, we have a lot of things happening. We have unlimited middle and upper ammunition, which is really what we're using in this war. We may have casualties. that often happens in war.
It's actually branding on this whole Iran war that he was kind of consistent on. But then yesterday, Trump decided to give his war a little rebrand.
But we took a little excursion because we felt we had to do that to get rid of some evil. And I think you'll see it's going to be a short-term excursion. Short-term. Short-term.
So now the president's war is a short-term excursion, emphasis on short-term. He's now talking about the war like it's a weekend golf trip, just a short little excursion. Remember, this is the same president who said just last week that wars can be fought forever and very successfully. Nothing Trump says day to day has any real meaning. Every pronouncement is liable to change on a dime. And it's not just coming from Trump himself, it's really his entire administration. I mean, at the start of the week, oil prices skyrocketed after Iran effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz, a key waterway through which much of the world's oil supply is shipped. And then today, Trump's energy secretary, Chris Wright, took to Twitter to announce that the U.S. Navy, quote, successfully escorted an oil tanker through the Strait of Hormuz. You can see the tweet right there on the screen. That single tweet sent the price of oil tumbling back to earth because it sent the message that oil tankers would perhaps be able to get through this very key strait moving forward, which means there wouldn't be the same reduction of available oil in the marketplace, and prices would then come down. The Wall Street Journal reports that Wright's tweet may have wiped out nearly $84 million worth of value in just one oil-linked fund alone. But then, just 10 minutes later, Secretary Wright suddenly deleted the tweet. And the White House then confirmed that the Navy did not escort any tanker through the strait, as Chris Wright had claimed in his tweet. And a few hours later, Reuters reported that the U.S. has actually been refusing near-daily requests from the shipping industry for military escorts, telling them the risk is simply too high, according to sources familiar with the matter. So the energy secretary then basically tweets that the U.S. is helping oil tankers navigate around Iran. That happened first, causing massive swings in the global market for oil. And then he quickly deletes his tweet, and the White House comes out and says, yeah, that never happened. And to top it all off, we learned that actually the U.S. has been refusing to help oil tankers because the risk is, of course, too high. These are life and death issues that affect the safety of shipping workers in international waters, and it has massive effects on the global economy, including the price of gas paid at the pump every single day by millions and millions of Americans. So what does the president have to say about all of this, what I just outlined there? Does he have a plan for how those oil tankers can navigate safely out of this war zone? Well, here's what he told his buddies over at Fox and Friends.
So, Brian, you did a phone interview with the president of the United States. What is his read on this?
So I asked him, how do you get the prices down? I know how much you care about oil and gas. And he says, tell these tankers to get to it. We've wiped out most of their launchers. Here's exactly what he said. These ships should go through the Strait of Hormuz and show some guts.
What a solution. Trump says oil tankers and all of the people working on them should just sail on through that deadly strait and show some guts. Which is even crazier when you consider that CNN reported today that Iran has begun laying mines throughout the Strait of Hormuz, according to people familiar with an intelligence report on the issue. And the president just told civilian oil tankers to show some guts and start sailing through there anyway. Almost as if he maybe realized his mistake or someone told him it was, who knows. He posted to Truth Social this afternoon demanding Iran remove any mines in the strait or face consequence, quote, at a level never seen before. You know, the man loves a threat. It's quite obvious they are just making this all up as they go along. In another poorly thought through effort to curb rising oil prices, the Trump administration is reportedly considering easing sanctions on Russian oil. And this despite the fact that Russia is, of course, an ally of Iran. And the Washington Post cites 3 U.S. officials who say Russia is providing intelligence to target U.S. forces. Today, the real estate guy Trump made his envoy for the Middle East was asked about that contradiction inherent in easing sanctions on Russia at a time when they are helping to target and kill U.S. troops. And here's what he had to say.
Do we think that the Russians have shared intelligence about the location of U.S. military assets? And if they have, why would we be giving waivers on Russian oil sanctions?
Well, I'm not an intel officer, so I can't tell you. I can tell you that
yesterday on the call with the president, the Russians said that they have not been sharing. That's what they said. So, you know, we can take them at their word.
You don't have to be an intel officer to know that you can't trust the Russians. Just see 2016, see the war in Ukraine, see any number of things Vladimir Putin and the Russians have done in recent years. Yet his answer was the Russians say they're not doing it, so we should just take them at their word. Oh, and also as a reminder, Russia is one of Iran's biggest allies. Just take them at their word. This haphazard policy and contradictions coming out of this White House are staggering. Everything they say feels like it was kind of made up on the spot and not coordinated in any way to justify whatever they did, not just yesterday, but maybe just a few hours ago. And perhaps the best example we have of that involves one of the most serious and tragic incidents in this war so far. As you probably know by now, in the early hours of this war, an Iranian girls' school was struck by a missile. Iranian officials estimate that around 175 people were killed, many of them children. And we've now had multiple reports claiming that the strike likely came from the United States, that our country likely killed those girls. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has been asked about those reports multiple times, and each time he has responded with some version of, we're investigating it. But Donald Trump has a kind of a bit of a different story.
Mr. President, did the United States bomb a girls' elementary school in southern Iran on the first day of the war and kill 170?
No, in my opinion, based on what I've seen, that was done by Iran.
Is that true, Mr. Hegseth? It was Iran who did that?
We're certainly investigating.
Okay, lots to unpack there, including Hegseth like leering over Trump on Air Force One. That aside, Trump says Iran did it. Reports say that the U.S. did it. Trump's defense secretary won't go beyond we're investigating. But basically, just to kind of put a fine point on this, Trump is suggesting with no evidence that maybe it was actually Iran who bombed their own school with weapons Iran does not have, just to cut through it right there. I mean, yesterday, New York Times correspondent Sean McCreish offered the world a lesson in how to hold an erratic president accountable during a time of war. Here's what happened.
You just suggested that Iran somehow got its hands on a tomahawk and bombed its own elementary school on the first day of the war. But you're the only person in your government saying this. Even your defense secretary wouldn't say that when he was asked, standing over your shoulder on your plane on Saturday. Why are you the only person saying this?
Because I just don't know enough about it. I think it's something that I was told is under investigation. But tomahawks are used by others, as you know. Numerous other nations have tomahawks. They buy them from us. But I will certainly, whatever the report shows, I'm willing to live with that report.
Every moment of that interaction makes it clear that Trump's claim is not based on anything other than his desire to deflect blame. And today, the White House basically admitted as much.
Why did President Trump say yesterday that Iran may have Tomahawk missiles when there are only 3 other U.S. allies plus the U.S. that have those missiles?
The president has a right to share his opinions with the American public.
His opinion? Is Trump's opinion that Iran has Tomahawk missiles that they used against their own school? That's quite an opinion. Trump's claim that Iran is responsible is nothing more than an opinion. No one else in his administration is willing to stand behind it, which tells you a lot. They have a lot to answer for right now. And today we got reports that initial estimates showed Trump's war cost American taxpayers $5.6 billion in just the first 2 days. At the same time, a new report from an external government watchdog finds that Pete Hegseth's Pentagon was already on a massive spending spree before the war began, dropping $15 million on, wait for it, if you haven't seen this story, look it up, steak, and another $6.9 million on lobster tail in just the month of September. Wired magazine reports that in the middle of a war, the Pentagon is reportedly pushing civilian employees to go volunteer to help with Trump's immigration crackdown. And every day they are showing us that they have no plan, no strategy, and no unified message for the American people and for the world. Someone should answer for all of this. And today, a group of Senate Democrats threatened to effectively hold up every single vote on the Senate floor until Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and Secretary of State Marco Rubio come before the Senate and testify under oath about this war. Is that where accountability starts? Maybe it is. One of the senators demanding those hearings, Senator Adam Schiff, joins me here at the table when we come back. As promised, joining me now is Democratic Senator Adam Schiff of California. Senator Schiff, there's always so much to ask you about. I just want to start with all these mixed messages and the impact, because some of it just shows their complete incompetence, but also there's a danger to it. You have traveled around the world. You've been on so many committees where you have access to important national security information. I mean, specifically on the Straits of Hormuz and whether or not ships were being escorted through, that made the oil markets kind of go up and down. I talked about some of the dangers, but what am I missing? And what should people understand out there about the dangers of how they're operating publicly?
Well, I think the biggest point I would make on this subject, and you went through so many of the gyrations of the president about the aims of the war, the purpose of the war, the threats we were supposedly facing that were so imminent. If you don't have a clear rationale for going to war, it's very difficult to say when the war should end. You don't know what your goals are. You're not sure why you're there. And so how do you say, okay, we have succeeded with what we attempted to do? And this is part of the reason why you can't get a straight answer about when this is going to end, because they're not sure why they're there. And meanwhile, we just learned today from the Pentagon that 140 U.S. service members have been injured, 8 of them gravely injured. We've already lost 7 service members, including a Californian. So our service members are paying a real price. And of course, the American people are paying a real price. I keep thinking about the fact if we're spending $1 billion a day dropping bombs in Iran, what we could be doing with that $1 billion here in the United States. If a hospital costs $100 million, you could build 10 hospitals every day for what we're blowing up in Iran. But you know, the comments, the back and forth about whether we're guarding ships going through the straits or we're not, is just reckless, dangerous, incompetent. I mean, let's say that some of these tankers had taken the president up on this and shown some guts, as he said, and been the victim of Iranian mines. What a disaster that would be. So our service members performing amazingly, brilliantly, with great courage. I wish the same could be said for the civilian leadership, which is showing a dangerous level of incompetence.
I know one of the members of the military we lost was from California, if I'm correct. And I wonder, because you have spent time meeting with these families and seeing families who have lost loved ones or have daughters and grandchildren fighting, when you hear phrases like, this is a short excursion, it's just how Trump described it. And actually, Speaker Mike Johnson repeated that language. What do you think about? How do you think these families who have men and women serving, who worry about their children being sent overseas, hear that?
I literally learned that he had used that word just before watching the dignified transfer of the last of the 7 who were killed. And seeing that solemn ceremony and then realizing that the president is now describing this the way a cruise liner describes, hey, if you want the beach excursion, you can do this. If you want the windsurfing excursion, you can do that. Describing this war as some kind of excursion is insulting. It is denigrating, belittling the sacrifice that people are making. The American people deserve better than that. Our service members deserve better than that. For the president to state on Air Force One that we had not bombed a girls' school in Iran, but that Iran did it, and not just say that and not just express what his press secretary lamely calls his opinion, but to say on the basis of what he had seen. This is what the president said. Well, what exactly did he see? This is why I want hearings in the Congress, open hearings before the American people. Let's put Secretary Hegseth, who was looking over his shoulder in that plane, under oath and ask him, what did you show the president? What did the intelligence community show the president that for even a moment suggested that Iran had used one of our own munitions to blow up one of their schools?
It's such a pivotal thing, and under oath. And what struck me when I saw the reporting about this is that historically, I mean, Democratic and Republican administrations have briefed Congress in classified settings, and you've had hearings, but you haven't had the need to do this in the same, or to call for this in the same way, because you can't trust what they're saying.
That's exactly right. When we look, for example, at the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, and you look back at when we started bombing these ships in the Caribbean, the intelligence community put out a product that said that Tren de Aragua this Venezuelan gang was not controlled by the government, not directed by the government. Well, that contradicted the president and part of his rationale for this campaign of blowing up ships. So Gabbard and her chief of staff basically told the Intelligence Council, rewrite your opinion. So if there's an intelligence opinion out there or analysis about who was responsible for blowing up that school in Iran, can we be confident that we're going to see it? Can we be confident the director's not going to tell those analysts to rewrite the report? This is the danger when you can't trust the leadership of the country. You just can't accept anything they tell you, which in a time of peace is one thing, it's bad enough. But when you're at war, it's just catastrophic.
Senator Schiff, you've been so generous with your time, and you've agreed to stick around. We're going to take a quick break. We'll keep going with our conversation after that. We are back, as promised, Democratic Senator Adam Schiff of California. So before the break, we were talking about your call with a number of your other colleagues for public hearings under oath for these officials, a number of cabinet members from the Trump administration, about the war, because we can't believe them. We don't know what they're saying. I think it's so interesting because everybody's not aware out there, maybe watching, all of the levers that you have. So how would this work exactly? You want to end up with them in a public hearing. What are the levers you can use, and how can you use them?
So there are a number of tools that we have. They're limited because we're in the minority.
Yes.
But nevertheless, they need us when there's a 60-vote requirement. There are also resolutions that are privileged. Tim Kaine brought up resolutions, for example, on the trade issue. And much as the Republicans didn't want to have to vote on it, we could force them to vote on it. These war powers resolutions are also privileged. So we've introduced a number of them. And we're going to look at a variety of tools that we have, including war powers resolutions, but other techniques we have to essentially force them to do what they don't want, which is to provide information to the American people, to submit to being under oath and being questioned. We saw what happened when Kristi Noem actually had to answer questions under oath.
Didn't go well for her.
It didn't go well. No, we still don't know whether she was lying or the president is lying about that PR campaign. But nevertheless, it's a chance to put people on the record. And we need, since the administration has never come to the Congress for authorization for this war, as the Constitution requires, we at least need these cabinet members to come before the American people in an open setting, not a classified setting where they can deny they ever said it or they can accuse us of saying something we shouldn't. But no, they should testify out in the open.
One of the questions I'm certain you would love to ask them about is about the Russia of this all. I mean, I just shared what Steve Witkoff had to say about Russia said basically that they didn't share intel with Iran, as if we should be believing Russia, which I'm sure that gave you, of all people, a chuckle. What should people out there understand about the Russia of this all and their role here, and why that's so concerning?
So the Witkoff comments reminded me of two things. Reminded me of the classic Russian idiom of the useful idiot. What more useful idiot can they have than somebody who says that? But it also was such a flashback to Helsinki, when Donald Trump was standing on the stage and Trump won next to Putin, and he was saying, well, Putin says that they haven't been interfering in the election, and why should I not believe him? So I guess the Witkoff apple doesn't fall far from the tree. They are being, both of them, useful idiots for Russia, and they are relaxing sanctions against Russia because they're afraid of the increase in oil prices. And look, I don't blame them for being afraid of the escalating oil and gas prices that they're causing. But the big winner so far of the Iran war is not the United States. It's not Iran. It's not our Gulf allies that are seeing their urban, suburban facilities being bombed in retaliation. It's the Russians. The Russians are already the unmitigated winners of this Iran war because oil has appreciated so much in value. The Russian war coffers are now surging once again. And because we are now diverting resources to protect our allies and ourselves from the incoming from Iran, those interceptors are not going to be available for Ukraine. So we've both taken the focus off Ukraine. We are not going to have the same number of supplies to give Ukraine. And Russia's going to have more money to make war against Ukraine. So if there is a winner so far in this war, it's Russia.
Meanwhile, while you're here, because you can talk about so many things, the administration subpoenaed records from 2020 from Arizona. We know that's not about changing the outcome of the 2020 election. We know that's they've already gone through that. It's obviously about 2026. What do you make of that, and what's your level of concern about it?
I think the subpoenas in Arizona, Maricopa County, the FBI raid in Georgia, this is all trying to establish some kind of phony predicate for them to say that the election system is so flawed, the machines don't work, there's too much fraud and absentee ballots, that come November they can nationalize the elections, they can somehow outlaw absentee ballots, or they can seize ballot boxes, and they will have some pretext to do it. So this is, I think, part of laying the foundation to interfere with, suppress the vote, or ultimately subvert the vote. They understand, as we do in the Democratic Party, that they are likely to get clobbered in the midterms. And, you know, they're willing to resort to anything. So we are doing everything every day to anticipate, to push back, to fight back. And really the best protection we have is not in the Congress. It's certainly not with the Supreme Court. It is those who have the most important title, and that is a voter. We need to so overwhelm the polls with Democratic votes that this election in the midterm is not even close.
Senator Adam Schiff, we'll have to come back and we'll have a longer conversation about that, which I think is so important. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Okay, coming up, we have brand new exclusive reporting about the Justice Department website still missing documents with accusations against Jeffrey Epstein's associates. Lisa Rubin broke the story just as we were coming on the air tonight, and she's going to join us to talk about it next. If you need any more proof that Trump's past relationship with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein is not going away anytime soon, behold a 12-foot-tall golden statue depicting Trump embracing his old pal Epstein from behind, just like Jack and Rose in the iconic scene from the movie Titanic. Yep, that's what that is. Now, this protest art was erected today on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. by a group that calls itself the Secret Handshake. And it is, shall I say, timely. Because tonight, MS Now has brand new reporting from our tireless reporter, Lisa Rubin, highlighting the extent to which Trump's DOJ still has not released all of the Epstein files in their possession as required by law. And Lisa Rubin reports tonight that Epstein files released so far are missing FBI notes and memos reflecting interviews with other women alleging abuse by other prominent men, including former Wall Street executive Jess Staley and private equity billionaire Leon Black. Now, a lawyer for Leon Black told MS Now there is absolutely no truth to any of the allegations. Additionally, both men have denied any wrongdoing in connection with Epstein or any women they met through him. But joining me now to dig into her brand new reporting is MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin. Lisa, you just broke this story. I'm so grateful you were available. Let's start by just tell us about your reporting.
Well, Jen, I think what you said at the top is the most important piece of it, which is that it's not just that there were allegations against President Trump memorialized in documents that were missing from the Epstein files. In fact, the Department of Justice, based on reporting from MS Now and other outlets, including NPR and the independent journalist Roger Sullenberger, has now produced those missing documents. And last week, they also said that they were giving us a handful of others that they discovered were inadvertently withheld. And yet, we know, based on our own investigation, that there are still missing documents reflecting accusations from women who didn't just say they experienced years of abuse at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein, but also made accusations that they were abused by or had assaults attempted on them by associates of Jeffrey Epstein, including Jess Staley and Leon Black, as the woman that I discuss in my reporting tonight told prosecutors in 2019.
Now, as you said, I mean, this is Jess Staley and Leon Black are names we've heard a little bit before. This is new information. We're kind of learning about these allegations. Given the memos, I mean, prosecutors seem to believe her story was credible, and at least some of the conduct was criminal, it seems. Tell us about what happened to the case, as far as you know.
Well, it's not clear what happened to this case. First of all, prosecutors spoke to this woman after Jeffrey Epstein was already dead, but we know that they spoke to her on at least 3 occasions. We also know that the Manhattan District Attorney's Office was at various points in time, including as recently as June of 2023, looking into allegations about Jess Staley and Leon Black made by other women as well. And yet, neither of those accusations materialized into charges. And Jen, the most important thing that I want to convey to you and our viewers is that there was a cost to the delay. When Jeffrey Epstein got his sweetheart deal in 2007 and went without further investigation or prosecution until 2019, when the Southern District of New York got involved, there were people whose stories got caught in that delay. This woman is one of them. We don't know whether the federal government or New York State would have prosecuted any of the 3 people involved here if they had had a chance, but we do know that at this point, the statute of limitations for the crimes that may have been committed against her have run both in the federal system and in the state system.
Lisa Rubin, I can't even describe to people watching how tireless you are. And for everybody who's frustrated and doesn't know what's in the documents, you are digging through them. You are finding stuff. You're doing incredible reporting. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your new reporting with us.
Thanks, Jen, for having me.
We have to sneak in a very quick break, but Lawrence has Senator Mark Kelly standing by. He's got a lot to say, I'm sure. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. That does it for me tonight on quite a news day. Thanks for being with us. The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell starts right now. Hey, Lawrence.
Hey, Jen. We have Ali Velshi, who's got the results from Georgia, and we're going to go straight to him.
Great. I'll look forward to watching.
And Ali, what do we have?
Yeah, let's talk. We got pretty much all the vote in Georgia District 14. This is Marjorie Taylor Greene's district that she stepped out of. So this is the race to replace her for the duration of this year. There will be a normal primary for this district in May. But right now, with 99% of the vote in, the biggest vote getter right now is the Democratic candidate, the former retired Brigadier General Sean Harris, who ran against Marjorie Taylor Greene last time. He's outperforming his own performance against her. But this is Georgia. Like most southern states, you have to get 50% or more to win. So Sean Harris advances with Clayton Fuller to the runoff, which will be on April the 7th. Here's the interesting thing. Clayton Fuller was endorsed by Donald Trump, but Colton Moore, who is the third place candidate today, is not advancing the runoff. He's sort of the Trumpier of the candidates, but you're seeing an outperformance by Sean Harris against his own numbers with Marjorie Taylor Greene the last time around. He was at about 35.5%. He's at 37.5% almost, but there are 2 other Democratic candidates in this race. So when you add their totals up, they're at about 1% each. That takes him almost to 40%. So now he's at 40% versus the collection of Republicans at 60%. So again, this is an improvement over what Democrats have done in this very, very Republican county. I just want to show you where this is in Georgia. It's the top left corner, the most northwestern part of Georgia. It's also the most Republican part of Georgia. It's mostly rural. It's got Rome in it. It does have a bit of the Atlanta suburbs. It's got a little bit of Cobb County over here. These are all, as you know, fairly blue districts, but it's got a little bit of Cobb County in here where Sean Harris has done very well. This was where he won last time as well. So all in all, it is an overperformance by Sean Harris over his own Democratic performance versus Marjorie Taylor Greene in the last election. These 2 will go to a runoff on April the 7th, Lawrence.
So, Ali, not a good night for Donald Trump. There's nothing in these results tonight from which Donald Trump can take encouragement.
That is correct. He has not overperformed versus his own performance in this county, in this district in the last election. So this is once again, it's a very, very, very conservative district, generally speaking. The Democrats have an advantage in Sean Harris. You'll remember at one point, Marjorie Taylor Greene didn't even have an opponent. Sean Harris has worked really hard in this district, and he's a former brigadier general. He sort of speaks the language of rural Georgians. So he's doing well, and he's building on his own momentum. Again, the betting markets wouldn't tell you that he's likely to become the next representative from Georgia 14. But if you look at the example of special elections across the country where Democrats have been winning by more or losing by less, this is a perfect example, not just of losing by less, but in this particular case tonight, he's the biggest vote getter in the most conservative district, in one of the most conservative districts in Georgia.
Ali Velshi, thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And now we turn to one of the things on the minds of those voters today, Donald Trump's war. They don't know what they're talking about. They started a war of choice, Donald Trump's choice, and now they, in every important sense, do not know what they are talking about. Donald Trump and everyone working for him in Washington on his war continue to demonstrate every day that they are completely lost. And if they don't know what they are talking about, that means they don't know what they are doing. They don't know what they are doing in Donald Trump's war. The competition for stupidest things said today about Donald Trump's war was won by the guy who is tied with Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, for the title of most ridiculous person ever chosen by a president to negotiate peace in the Middle East. 68-year-old Steve Witkoff is a real estate developer in real life who would not have been chosen by any president of the United States to do anything, anywhere, until Donald Trump decided to send him into negotiations, not just in the Middle East, but also in Moscow with Vladimir Putin. Steve Witkoff obviously knew nothing about the Middle East or Vladimir Putin when Donald Trump chose him. And now that he's met Vladimir Putin, he still knows nothing about Vladimir Putin, as he demonstrated so embarrassingly today when Carl Quintanilla at CNBC asked him why Donald Trump decided to allow Vladimir Putin to take full advantage of the explosive increase in the price of oil and profit off of that new price, a new price created by Donald Trump's war.
Do we think that the Russians have shared intelligence about the location of U.S. military assets? And if they have, why would we be giving waivers on Russian oil sanctions?
Well, I'm not an intel officer, so I can't tell you. I can tell you that yesterday on the call with the president, the Russians said that they have not been sharing. That's what they said. So, you know, we can take them at their word, but they did say that.
We can take them at their word. He said that. Donald Trump's clown of the day, Steve Witkoff, says we can take Vladimir Putin's word for it that Russia has not been helping Iran target attacks on American military personnel. That is the single worst thing Vladimir Putin could possibly be doing to the United States in this war. And Vladimir Putin knows it. And Vladimir Putin also knows that Donald Trump has always behaved like Vladimir Putin's trained puppy around the Russian dictator. Vladimir Putin knows that he has lied to Donald Trump to his face, and Donald Trump has then gone out to a microphone to tell the world, I believe Vladimir Putin. After credible reporting by MS Now, the New York Times, and the Washington Post that Vladimir Putin was helping Iran target the American military, which led to the deaths of 7 American soldiers and injuring 140 American soldiers, all Vladimir Putin had to do was tell Donald Trump on the phone yesterday that he didn't do it. Donald Trump might not actually be so stupid as to actually believe Vladimir Putin, but it doesn't matter because Donald Trump is deeply perverse enough to publicly claim to believe Vladimir Putin, and so is Steve Witkoff. Donald Trump's breathtakingly incompetent real estate developer buddy, Steve Witkoff, does appear to actually be stupid enough to believe Vladimir Putin and to say on television that he believes Vladimir Putin. They have no idea what they're talking about. None of them do, least of all Donald Trump, who began his war calling for the, quote, unconditional surrender, end quote, of Iran. And a day later said, we've already won, exclamation point. And now 3 days after that, 3 days after saying we've already won, no one working for him has any idea if we have won yet.
From the beginning, from this podium, we haven't stated how long it will take. Our will is endless. Ultimately, the president gets to determine the end state of those objectives. It's not for me to posit whether it's the beginning, the middle, or the end.
He has no idea. He has no idea what he's talking about. The only defense secretary in history who had to promise to stop king to get confirmed by a Republican Senate has no idea what he is doing. He has no idea whether it's the beginning, the middle, or the end. That same Secretary of Defense brought that same ignorance to the United States Senate today in a closed-door briefing about Donald Trump's war.
I emerged from this briefing as dissatisfied and angry, frankly, as I have from any past briefing in my 15 years in the Senate. I am left with more questions than answers, especially about the cost of the war.
And of course, the question of, is this the beginning, the middle, or the end? After the ignorance-filled briefing with Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense and Donald Trump's Secretary of State, both of whom have repeatedly been caught in public lies since the beginning of their service in those jobs, Senator Elizabeth Warren said this.
It is still the case that the Trump administration cannot explain the reasons that we entered this war, the goals we're trying to accomplish, and the methods for doing that. The one part that seems clear is that while there is no money for 15 million Americans who lost their health care, there's $1 billion a day to spend on bombing Iran.
Yesterday, Donald Trump tried to tell the world the absurd lie that the Tomahawk missile, the American Tomahawk missile that hit a girls' school, killing 175 people, most of whom were the students at the school, was fired at the school by Iran, to which our first guest tonight, the former Navy combat pilot and former astronaut Senator Mark Kelly, said Trump has no idea what he's talking about. No, the Iranians don't have Tomahawk missiles. Dozens of children are dead, and the investigation into how this happened needs to be fast and transparent. That's how we keep this from happening again. We don't need these deflections from the president or Hegseth running his mouth about, quote, stupid rules of engagement. That was Pete Hegseth's phrase about this war. He said there are no stupid rules of engagement, meaning no rules of engagement, meaning we can fire Tomahawk missiles at girls' schools if we want to. One Republican has shown that he knows how to talk about the innocent casualties of war. Republican Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana said this about the Tomahawk missile attack on the girls' school, quote, "It was terrible. We made a mistake. Other countries do that sort of thing intentionally, like Russia. We would never do that intentionally. I think the department is investigating it now, and I'm sorry. I'm just so sorry it happened. It was a mistake." Donald Trump's press secretary continued her mindless and relentless campaign to insult America's intelligence today. She actually said, quote, "The president is not making anything up, Nancy." Donald Trump makes things up every day about drapes and ballrooms and Tomahawk missiles and the price of gas and the price of everything and girls killed at a girls' school in Iran and the lie that Americans don't pay his tariffs. Making stuff up is what Donald Trump does. That's why Nancy Cortez of CBS asked Donald Trump's press secretary today, quote, "So is he making this up to justify his decision to go to war now?" To which Donald Trump's press secretary said, "The president is not making anything up, Nancy." If Donald Trump is speaking, he is making something up. And making it up is the charitable way to describe Donald Trump's pathological lying. Donald Trump's press secretary has the same job that Steve Early had. But Steve Early never lied. She lies every day, like every Trump press secretary before her. Steve Early created the modern version of White House press secretary when he went to work for the newly elected President Franklin Roosevelt in 1933. He served in that position for President Roosevelt every day of World War II. It was actually Steve Early who gave American news media confirmation on December 7th, 1941, that Pearl Harbor was attacked that morning by the Japanese military and the United States was drawn into World War II. The next day, in a 5-minute speech to Congress, President Roosevelt asked for a declaration of war against Japan, which Congress passed immediately. Days later, after Japan's ally, Germany, declared war on the United States, the president asked for a second declaration of war against Germany, which the Congress passed immediately. A little over a year after that, before the United States had made any significant progress in World War II, President Roosevelt announced that the only terms he would accept to end the war at a time when there was no end in sight and no real progress in sight for the American military, the only terms the President of the United States would accept was unconditional surrender. His words, unconditional surrender. And at that point, the world knew exactly how the war was going to end. It was going to end in unconditional surrender because the President of the United States said so. No one knew when it would end. President Roosevelt didn't know when it would end. He didn't know how many years it would take, but everyone knew what it was going to look like. There would be a signing ceremony. A German official would sign a formal act of surrender. A Japanese official would sign a formal act of surrender. And today, 4 days after Donald Trump called for unconditional surrender, his White House press secretary confessed that she has no idea what that means.
It goes back to, what does that unconditional surrender look like?
She doesn't know what it looks like. Germany was the first to sign the surrender document written by the United States and dictated to Germany. Signed by the Supreme Commander of Allied Forces in Europe, Dwight D. Eisenhower. He dictated it. He wrote it. He went on to become President Eisenhower. 3 months later, this is what unconditional surrender looked like in Tokyo Bay on the American Navy ship, the USS Missouri, with the Japanese generals signing the act of surrender in which the Japanese were not allowed to negotiate a single word, just like the Germans before them. That's what unconditional surrender means. That is what unconditional surrender looks like. Donald Trump's press secretary doesn't know what unconditional surrender looks like, and she doesn't know what war looks like. Steve Early understood both of those things. Steve Early won a Silver Star for bravery in combat in World War I before becoming the White House press secretary, who abolished the custom of reporters being forced to put their questions to the president in writing, and thereby created what is now the modern version of a presidential press conference. Steve Early opened the door of the Oval Office to let the reporters pour in, usually a couple of times a week, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt took their questions without hesitation and without favoritism. FDR held more presidential press conferences than any other president in history, and he always knew what he was talking about. And if he was asked a question about an obscure subject that he didn't know about, he would simply admit that he didn't know, and Steve Early would get an answer to that question later for that reporter. Americans knew they could have faith in their president's leadership during World War II. And Americans knew they could take him at his word. And now Americans know, and White House reporters know, the president makes stuff up, and he and everyone around him don't know what they're talking about. The only thing that Americans know as the missiles keep flying and people keep dying is that we cannot ever take Donald Trump at his word. Leading off our discussion tonight is former Navy pilot, former astronaut, Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona. He's a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator Kelly, have you been able to make any more sense than any of your Senate colleagues about what this war is about tonight?
Well, Lawrence, thank you for having me on. Not yet. You know, I've been keeping a running list of about up to about 12 reasons why we are in this conflict. I haven't heard the president give any kind of an explanation for how this is good for the American people. I mean, folks are having a hard time affording, gas is obviously going up and will probably continue to do that. But rent and groceries, how does this benefit everyday Americans? We've got no explanation.
And Donald Trump is just telling people, you won't even have to be patient. The gas prices will be coming down very, very quickly, which I guess in his mind must be, sometime this week.
Right. I hope that's the case. It doesn't look that way. The Straits of Hormuz now have, it's publicly reported, have some sea mines there. That's going to be extra discouraging for ships that pass through there. 20% of the world's crude oil goes through those straits. I would expect gas prices to go up under the situation we're currently in. Hey, I don't think this president really anticipated well how this would go. He didn't have a strategic plan. He didn't even factor Russia into this entire calculation. You were talking about earlier how the Russians are going to benefit from this, and I can't imagine there was any thought to the war in Ukraine between Russia because, you know, we have a president that doesn't think strategically, and he doesn't seem to know all that much. You know, this talk of unconditional surrender, I think you highlighted how ridiculous it is and sounds, because it's a ridiculous statement for him to make and for his press secretary to echo.
Do you believe, as Donald Trump's advisors believe, and apparently Donald Trump believes, Vladimir Putin, when Vladimir Putin says we did not help Iran target the American military?
Well, you got to assume the worst out of the Russians, and I would never take them at their word. Do not trust them in this situation. They're going to do what is in their best interest, and you have to assume helping the Iranians hurts us, hurts the U.S. military, and helps them and their ally Iran. So what Steve Witkoff said about, you know, trust in the Russians, that's again, that is a thing that makes no sense at all.
And after Vladimir Putin's phone call with Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin publicly, once again, proclaimed his absolute loyalty to the Iranian regime.
Yeah, and that's not surprising. And that is not in our best interests. You know, we are at war with Iran because this president chose, this war at this moment without having a strategic plan, without having a goal, without having a timeline. And I think we really run some serious risk of this escalating into some sort of ground war. The president's rationale for this shifts almost every single day. I heard just earlier, a couple days ago, is now about oil. It's been about regime change. It's been about ballistic missiles. It's been about nuclear weapons. But if he does decide to try to remove some of the uranium, this gets into a much more challenging conflict.
Is there any way to do that without actually sending troops into Iran?
No. I mean, last summer he said after Midnight Hammer that the Iranian nuclear capability was obliterated. And myself and others, many others, tried to correct him and say, well, it was damaged. It's not obliterated. That's very hard to do. Lawrence, I've got a lot of experience, dropping weapons on things, buildings, ships, bridges, tanks. It's hard to destroy things entirely with air power. I find it interesting that it's always the guy who wasn't in the military, who hasn't dropped a bomb, who hasn't tried to destroy a target, that thinks he knows more than everybody else. That capability wasn't obliterated. And for us to completely eliminate it now, it would take a ground force to do that. It would be a complicated operation. And I am very confident that the Iranian people the IRGC would fight against our troops on the ground. I think it's also important to remember, Lawrence, that we're in this because Donald Trump ripped up a deal, the Iranian nuclear deal, that was actually working pre-2018.
Yeah, the idea that a president would rip up an agreement that Iran was complying with, all the evidence indicated they were complying with it over this very issue, and then go to war over the issue after personally ripping up the deal is something that history has never seen before.
No, I mean, he put us in this situation. He tore up the deal. It was his decision. They were not enriching uranium beyond the level that they were held to in the agreement. After that, they began to enrich uranium further, and it's gone up and it's gone down. But now we're at the point where this new regime, the son of the supreme leader, the new supreme leader, is at some point going to make a decision if it's in the best interest of Iran to race to get a nuclear weapon. And I am extremely worried about that. That is a real risk we face today. And how unstable is the region going to be if the Iranians, if this regime actually possess a nuclear weapon? So that's the risk here. And there's only one person that put us into this situation, and he's the current occupant of the White House.
Senator Mark Kelly, thank you very much for starting off our coverage tonight.
Thanks for having me on.
And coming up, our next guest became the first United States senator in history to be tackled and detained by federal agents. His offense? Trying to ask Kristi Noem a question. California Senator Alex Padilla joins us next. Carol Leonnig and Ken Delanian's reporting for MS Now finds that about 300 FBI agents who worked mostly on national security matters have left the Bureau since President Donald Trump began his second term, including 45 who were fired, according to an internal count by current and former FBI employees. Most of those agents hunted terrorists and spies, and at least 50 of them were in leadership roles. Current and former officials say it's a talent drain without precedent in modern Bureau history, and one that leaves the nation vulnerable amid heightened terrorism threats due to the Iran war. Our next guest, Senator Alex Padilla of California, was an early critic of Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. Last June, Senator Padilla became the first United States senator in history to be tackled and detained by federal agents, forcibly removed from a press conference inside a safe federal building in Los Angeles for the offense of simply attempting to ask Kristi Noem a question about ICE operations in Los Angeles at that time. Joining us now is Democratic Senator Alex Padilla of California. He's the top Democrat on the Senate Rules Committee and a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee on the Senate Budget Committee. Senator Padilla, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And remind us, what was the question that you wanted to ask of Secretary Noem that day with her invasion forces present in Los Angeles?
Sure, Lawrence, good to be back with you. And I guess it was a couple of things. Number one, what the straw that broke the camel's back was during that press conference when Secretary Noem, soon to be former Secretary Noem, not for the first time said that the mission of the Department of Homeland Security in Los Angeles was to liberate the people of Los Angeles and California from their duly elected mayor and governor. How un-American, number one. Number two was trying to ask her to share data, because we had been getting reports in my office of the people who had been targeted, the people who had been detained, the people who had been arrested, from so many of my constituents claiming these are not the dangerous, violent criminals that this administration loves to talk so much about. There are people, including legal immigrants with work visas, even some citizens who had been detained, but yes, undocumented immigrants without violent criminal conviction history. They were hard workers, they're raising families, they're paying taxes, people who were deemed essential during the COVID pandemic and deserve to come out of the shadows, not this type of abusive treatment from ICE and CBP and others. But as you saw in the video, before I could even get a question out, I was removed from that press conference. But we've learned over the course of the last 9 months that everything we suspected has turned out to be true, and the enforcement activities that started in Los Angeles have only become more cruel, more violent as they spread across the country.
We now have MS Now's reporting from Carol Leonnig and Ken Delanian, which would be normally the subject of an investigation in the Senate Judiciary Committee, but that probably will not happen unless and until the Democrats win the Senate and control that committee. 300 FBI agents work mostly on national security matters, preventing terrorism attacks within the United States, all gone from the now Trump-controlled FBI. How vulnerable do you think that leads us?
Look, that's a very valid concern that we had before this unauthorized war against Iran. But now with the various ways in which Iran and its allies could potentially try to hit the United States back, it's even a higher priority question. But it's par for the course with this administration. They'll lie to our face about the economy, right? The State of the Union just a couple of weeks ago, Donald Trump claims the economy is strong when it's anything but. The cost of groceries is up. The cost of housing continues to go up. The cost of health care is spiking. You know, they're claiming our communities are safer, really, when the administration, including the Department of Justice, is so unprofessional and so misguided that career professionals are choosing to retire and choosing to leave than to follow this misdirected administration. That should tell you a whole lot. And so instead of the professional FBI agents, other staff at the Department of Justice focusing on things like drug trafficking, human trafficking, corruption, and white-collar crime, they're being redirected to, quote, immigration enforcement and really rounding up without judicial warrants people who are working as essential workers in so many industries and are trying to keep our economy chugging along.
Donald Trump has also said that he wants to shut down the United States Senate until the Republicans in the Senate pass a voting law that would require people to bring birth certificates, require people to bring passports with them, people who don't have passports, people who can't find their birth certificates, in order to vote in this country. And other aspects of it include delivering all sorts of voting records to Donald Trump's government. Are the Republicans going to be able to get this through the Senate?
Look, and here's where it all comes together, Lawrence. Their record, not just Trump, but the Republican majority that's been so complicit, their record is so bad, not just unpopular, truly damaging to working families across the country. Their only hope to hold on to power this November is to change the rules and rig the elections, if you will, before the balloting has begun for the general election. This SAVE Act is anything but. If it's anything, it's a Save Trump's Ass Act with what their purpose is it's not a voter ID bill, it's a voter suppression bill, number one. It would have the effect of making it harder for eligible people to register to vote, stay registered to vote, and to actually cast their ballot, to eliminate vote by mail, which is popular amongst both Democrats and Republicans. And by the way, they continue to say the quiet part out loud. Donald Trump speaking to the House Republican conference just yesterday or the day before, saying, pass this voter ID bill, and then we will win the November elections. That's their goal. That's their goal, to make sure that only the, quote, right people are voting, to elect, quote, the right leaders. We're not going to stand for it. I will die on the Hill to make sure it doesn't get out of the Senate. I don't think the votes are there, number one. Even if we do kill this bill in the Senate, which is my objective, I also anticipate Donald Trump trying to advance this through executive order or a trumped up state of emergency. We'll fight it every step of the way. Our voting rights are just too precious.
Senator Alex Padilla, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Lawrence.
And coming up, Donald Trump's election interference campaign has arrived in Arizona with federal subpoenas. Arizona's Secretary of State will join us next. Donald Trump has taken his election interference conspiracy to Arizona. The New York Times reports the FBI has expanded its criminal investigation into purported irregularities in the 2020 presidential election, issuing a grand jury subpoena for reams of information about voting results in Maricopa County, Arizona. The subpoena was issued in recent days to the Arizona State Senate, which oversaw a sprawling but partisan audit of the vote result that was ordered by Senate Republicans in Maricopa County in the months after Donald J. Trump lost to Joseph R. Biden. Joining us now is Arizona Secretary of State, Democrat Adrian Fuentes. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. What is your reading of this subpoena and what it might be trying to find?
Well, first, thanks for having me. Second, the subpoena is looking for all of the data that we actually thought the state Senate had turned back over to Maricopa County, and they should have after the quote-unquote audit was done. But as far as what they're looking for, frankly, Lawrence, it's a little disturbing. The Department of Justice has been demanding the personal identifying information from me on all of Arizona's voters. I've refused to give it up. They've sued me. I think this subpoena is an end around behind the judge's back. Unfortunately, I think they may be committing some misconduct here, trying to subvert the regular legal process, opening up a case just to investigate, quote unquote, and then grabbing the data on the backside. And if they're doing that, and that's what our investigation, which we're going to be launching, finds, we've got a real problem.
What methods do you have for investigating what Donald Trump is doing?
Well, look, we can make petitions to the court, and we can try to figure out exactly how it is that these subpoenas were issued. Unfortunately, we don't have the sorts of tools that might be available to a regular investigating or law enforcement agency. But we've got a great attorney general here in the name of Chris Mays, who has sued Donald Trump and his administration, I think 37 times already, and she's going to keep on marching. So we are at the stage right now of trying to figure out exactly what our options are. And as we work with the Attorney General's office, we will figure that out and execute appropriately to try to get to the bottom of this and protect Arizona's voters' sensitive information.
Do you have a worst case scenario of what Donald Trump's Justice Department could do with these records?
Well, I think what they might try to do is what the Privacy Act of 1974 intends to prevent, and that is create blacklists, go after folks who are on these lists, since they would have some of that personal identifying information. But I don't want to alarm anybody just yet, Lawrence. We don't know exactly what information was handed over to the FBI. I want to be reasonable here in our approach. We do not know exactly if the voter registration information in these files contains just the publicly available stuff, which is name and address, party affiliation, things of this nature, or if it has the more sensitive information that we are trying to protect, and that is mothers' maiden names, for example, a whole or part of social security numbers, driver's license number, tribal ID numbers, that sensitive stuff that we don't want to surrender. So we want to be really clear in our approach. We are going to operate within the law, and we're going to make sure to do everything in our power to continue to protect Arizona's voters.
Arizona Secretary of State Adrian Fontes, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
And coming up, federal judge Richard Eaton has given Donald Trump a deadline for refunding his illegal and unconstitutional tariffs. Our next guest, who brought the case to the Supreme Court that defeated Donald Trump's tariffs, is owed one of those refunds. That's next. On Friday, U.S. Court of International Trade Judge Richard Eaton ruled that Donald Trump must begin to refund tariffs the Supreme Court ruled illegal and unconstitutional. The Trump Justice Department told Judge Eaton, who is an expert on international trade, that U.S. Customs and Border Protection isn't able to immediately comply with his order to refund Trump's tariffs. CNBC reports that Judge Eaton said during a court hearing, Customs knows how to do this. They do it every day. They liquidate entries and make refunds. Judge Eaton gave Donald Trump 45 days to set up an automated system to process the tariff refunds, saying, quote, these duties must now be refunded with interest, and the clock is ticking. Further interest is accumulating every day, with approximately $650 million accruing per month. If the entries are not liquidated before the end of the year, it is further estimated that $10 billion of interest will have accrued. American taxpayers will bear this financial burden. Judge Eaton told Donald Trump and his lawyers to file a report describing their process to issue the refunds by this Thursday, just 2 days from now. And yesterday, 2 small businesses sued Donald Trump over his 10% tariff policy that he said he was going to implement immediately after the Supreme Court ruled that his other tariffs were illegal and unconstitutional. The co-founder of one of the companies said in a statement, quote, "Sudden global tariffs make it harder for us to operate, harder for our partners to sell their crops, and more expensive for American families. We joined this case because trade policy shouldn't be made by inventing an economic crisis." Joining us now is Rick Woldenberg, CEO of Learning Resources, which has been making award-winning educational toys for the last 40 years. His company was the lead plaintiff in the Trump tariff case in the Supreme Court. Rick, welcome back to the program. Congratulations. First time I get to congratulate you on this big win in the Supreme Court. And I have to say, when you see a judge from the Court of International Trade, where all those judges are actually experts on international trade, when you see them handling these cases, there's no doubt about the clarity of the situation. There's Judge Eaton telling Donald Trump's lawyers, of course you know how to do this, and he's ordering them to automate it. So that sounds like you can start to expect your refund.
It's always been my expectation we would get the refund. I'm gratified by what the judge said. The Supreme Court ruled that the tariffs were unlawful, which means that the government overcollected taxes. I think Judge Eaton is really just stating what every American expects. When the government collects too much in taxes, they have to give it back with interest, and, you know, let's get moving. And I agree with him.
And beginning as soon as people start filing their tax returns every year, the United States Treasury engages in a much bigger tax refund program than this, and it is automated, and people get their checks. They know that the Treasury knows how to do this on the income tax side, and Judge Eaton, who's an expert on the trade side, is saying they know exactly how to do it on tariffs, too.
They do. We've received rebates on overpaid duties and tariffs already through their electronic system, so the system works. I think that the declaration submitted by Customs in that case defines a fairly manual process, which I think you'd have to describe as worst case. But the judge has also pointed out that the government has a lot of computers, and certainly they process refunds to the tune of many millions a year. I have heard, can't verify, that it's over 100 million refunds in total, perhaps nationwide, to the 340 million people that live in this country. Yes, they can do it, and they need to do it.
I have to say, it is so refreshing to hear a judge who's actually an expert in this dealing with the Trump lawyers. They don't get away with anything that they try in front of other judges.
Well, I agree with that too, and you know, there have been various threats of appeals and so on, but I don't know what the legal basis would be, honestly. The tariff was unlawful, which is an unlawful tax, which means the taxes were overcollected. There's law on this. It's black and white, and the judge is right to say to the government, stop horsing around, you have to give the money back.
Rick Woldenberg, you are owed your refund, and you're owed a debt of gratitude from the people of this country for fighting for the Constitution by bringing this case to court. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. Rick Woldenberg, waiting for his tariff refund ordered by Judge Richard Eaton, gets tonight's last word. The 11th hour with Stephanie Ruhle starts now.
Tonight, America's war in Iran enters day 12 as new reporting shows Trump's advisors are pushing him to find an exit ramp. Where things stand as U.S. casualties rise. Then money, power, politics. Another volatile day for stocks as new reports surface that Iran may be mining the Strait of Hormuz. Plus, election night in Georgia. Ali Belshi is here with results from the race to fill Marjorie Taylor Greene's seat as the 11th hour gets underway on this Tuesday night. Good evening once again. I am Stephanie Ruhle, and today the Pentagon confirmed that about 140 U.S. service members have been wounded in the Iran war. 8 of them are still seriously hurt. That is on top of the 7 service members who have been killed in action. Today, Pentagon officials said they are ramping up strikes and moving further into Iran.
we continue to start working on and going deeper into Iran's military and industrial base in order to prevent the regime from being able to attack Americans, our interests, and our partners for years to come and project power outside their borders. This means servicing production facilities, research and development sites, and infrastructure.
Today will be, yet again, our most intense day of strikes inside Iran. The most fighters, the most bombers, the most strikes.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth also talked about what this war is not. And when you listen to this, remember that the president said he should be involved in picking Iran's next leader and that America would, quote, work tirelessly to bring Iran back from the brink of destruction, making it economically bigger, better, and stronger than ever before. Watch this.
This is not 2003. This is not endless nation building under those types of quagmires we saw under Bush or Obama. It's not even close. I've heard from a lot of people who I went through 20 years of those wars myself, worried about getting dragged in, worried about mission creep, worried about nation building or democracy expansion. That's never the perspective the president has pursued on this.
Meanwhile, leaders of the two countries are trading serious threats. Trump said he does not believe Iran's new supreme leader can live in peace. And a top Iranian security official responded to the president saying the following: "Beware, lest you be the one who disappears." There's also big developments on the Strait of Hormuz. Please pay attention to this, a crucial checkpoint in the global economy. CNN is now reporting Iran is laying mines there. This is according to two people familiar with the matter. The president responded that if there are any mines, he wants them removed immediately. And if they are not, Iran will face military consequences, quote, at a level never seen before. The status of that strait has consequences for the entire world when it comes to energy and shipping. That is part of the reason that some of Trump's advisors are pushing him to find an exit ramp to end this war as quickly as possible. That is according to the Wall Street Journal. And there are new concerns about America's supply of munitions. The Washington Post now reporting that the Pentagon burned about $5.6 billion worth in just the first 2 days of its attack on Iran. Democratic Senator Mark Warner told MS Now that he believes the U.S. spent as much as $7 billion in the first few days alone. All right, we've got a lot to cover, so let's get smarter with the help of our leadoff panel tonight. Alex Ward is here, national security reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Daniela Diaz, congressional reporter for Notice, joining us from Doral, Florida, covering House Republicans there. And Dave Weigel is back, political reporter for Semaphore. Okay, Alex, you were one of the reporters on that very story about Trump's advisors who are pushing him to find an exit ramp. What is the biggest warning sign for them? And is the president listening? Because I'm going to tell you, when I read it and I read exit ramp, it gave me flashbacks of all the Trump advisors behind the scenes during all of the tariff wars of, we're going to find an exit ramp. We're going to help them find an elegant way out of this. And there was no elegant way out of this. It ended up at the Supreme Court, and Trump is still in the trade war.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not a surprise that the things that are really constraining Trump here are the markets, and mainly the price of gas. And so as the price of gas rose, there was a lot of concern within the Trump administration about, what to do about it. So then you've seen the White House and other senior officials come out and basically say, oh, this thing will not last long. This may be over very soon. And what happened? The gas prices went down. So that is one thing that the Trump team cares quite deeply about. The other thing is that there are some polls out there showing that the war is quite unpopular. There are a lot of Americans against it. Republicans are not as strongly for it as they usually are for most things that Trump is for. The MAGA base is still fairly with Trump, but not as strongly as they would be on other issues. So there's just this political headwind that they're worried about, the gas prices and the fact that it's unpopular. With, of course, midterms approaching, that's leading Trump's team to basically tell him, hey, let's see if there's a way you can wrap this up neatly.
Daniela, the president can say something cute about the war ending and markets will pop. He will not get the same results when it comes to gas prices. And gas prices impact a whole lot more Americans than they do just plain investors. There are Republicans in Congress at this point that are clearly supporting the president on Iran. Have you gotten a sense of whether that support is going to last?
Stephanie, I'm here in Doral, Florida, where Republicans are having their yearly retreat, and Donald Trump was here yesterday. I was part of the press corps, the press conference where he addressed for the first time what was happening in Iran, and he defended his actions, including the rising gas prices, saying, look, we're trying to get this under control, but the timelines were contradicting. Stephanie, I mean, he was not able to lay out a clear plan, even while he was addressing House Republicans and talking about Iran, as well as answering questions with the press afterward. It's clear that he's saying, we're trying to wrap this up as quickly as possible, but then saying, we've just begun. So whether or not this is going to wrap anytime soon is unclear, but it's not very popular with Republicans privately. I mean, they would rather here at their retreat focus on affordability, focus on trying to pass another budget bill to lower tax cuts, to reform healthcare. They think that's what Americans need to be focused on right now, that they think that will help them in the midterms. To Alex's point, a war in Iran is not going to help them in the midterms. It's not very popular. It's potentially going to be incredibly expensive. And that is not something that Republicans want to focus on right now leading into this year.
It's not potentially expensive. It's definitely expensive. Dave, take us to the country. You're out there covering primary season. What are voters telling you?
They're not in favor of the war. The polling, I think, holds up based on my anecdotal evidence, talking to people in Texas and South Carolina. I'm heading to Illinois later this week. One, Democrats are very comfortable, no matter what kind of district they're in, opposing the war. I've talked to Democrats in places that Trump won by double digits. They're happy to say they're against it. They're a little bit more tongue-tied on whether, if they got to Congress, it was still happening, they'd vote against funding. Remember, a lot of Democrats crashed on those shoals during the Iraq War. But there's none of the sense that you saw with prior wars, especially at the beginning, that they're taking a risk by opposing this. The lesson, and a lot of them learned it from Donald Trump, is that there's just very little risk. If you oppose a war and it goes well, you don't need to apologize. You might need to apologize in the campaign later, but it's not held against you. If you're against a war and it goes poorly, you can use that clip forever. And Trump in his campaigns dined out on the fact that he had been critical of the Iraq War after it started, but fairly early on. People were listening. Republicans were listening. Democrats were listening. I've not been to Kentucky yet, but you can see in Tom Massey's race for re-election, he's very comfortable challenging the president on this war, and he's not finding, those of us who remember the Iraq War buildup and the aftermath and conservative media rallying to it, you are seeing some conservative media outlets be a lot more hawkish than the voters I talked to, the base I talked to. Even when people want to win, they did not vote for Trump to overthrow the Ayatollah. They believed him when he said he wouldn't need to do it because he'd make deals. And there is a sense of disappointment and a great sense of confidence that people don't need to be for it.
I want to talk about the Strait of Hormuz, because this is a situation people aren't thinking about, but it impacts all of us. Alex, if Iran is laying mines, it seems like they very well know it is a serious pressure point for President Trump. Where is this thing headed?
Yeah, I should know that the Journal just confirmed the story as well. We just put up on the site that are fewer than 10 mines that the Iranians have put down there in recent days. That's unclear if they're going to do more. But it could be a political signal to the president, or to basically say, hey, we, Iran, have leverage over this vital choke point. But for right now, we know that there are fewer than 10 that they've laid down in recent days that the U.S. is aware of. In terms of what it could mean, I mean, let's just go through the fact that it is a vital waterway between right off the coast of Iran. It is a very small choke point. About a fifth of the world's crude oil goes through there. Global trade, I think about 10%, I believe, is the number of global trade or global economy will go through there. I mean, everything will go up in terms of price. It's just a incredibly important, vital place. And we've seen in the past the Iranians weaponize the Strait of Hormuz and nearby waters in the 1980s, the so-called, the known as tanker wars, where they did this, they mined this, and the U.S. Navy got involved in order to demine it. Trump has said that he might be sending the U.S. Navy to escort tankers through, and now it seems they're seemingly on a mission to destroy the mining boats that the Iranians have, or some of which are inactive, some of which are docked, others which may be active in the waters we don't know. So this is a major thing. This is basically what every analyst has warned about when an American leader thinks about going to war with Iran. They've said, look, Iran can not maybe fully shut it down, but can definitely make it a difficult place to navigate, which of course is why companies don't want to send their tankers through there. So that sends insurance premiums up, that increases the length of time it takes for things to move in waterways, and that just increases prices for everybody.
Dave, Trump tried to pin high gas prices on President Biden during his administration. It worked. Won't the same thing happen to him if gas prices stay where they are?
In the short term, it absolutely has. And I've seen candidates around the country exploit that. And again, feel no fear that they're going to be called unpatriotic if they say it's not worth paying more for gas, whatever the objective in Iran is. It's just not clear to most people. And polling just finds it's about 55, 60% of the country. Not clear what the end goal is in Iran. Lindsey Graham can explain it. There is a cohort in the country that say we replace this regime, it becomes a secular regime. We've wiped out all of our problems in the Middle East in perpetuity, and will benefit in the long run for lower energy prices. That's the argument. I do not see a lot of patience from Americans on this. And in the past, Donald Trump has benefited from a lack of patience Americans have in being told that some foreign policy situation is going to be resolved in due time. Trump was promising the end of all conflicts when he ran for president, but also the end of real short-term pain for anything. The low prices that were going to come down at some point, unclear how. Gas was part of that. And again, I heard this week is candidates in places where Republicans were posting pictures of themselves next to gas prices 2 weeks ago and have taken them down, or have had to explain why they're not bragging about them anymore. Midterm is a ways away, but you've seen elections already in the last month. Democrats are doing quite well, and voters are blaming Republicans, even if they don't love Democrats, for the fact that the prices are up now.
Daniela, this war, I mentioned it before, is costing billions. Mark Warner said he thinks in the first few days alone, it cost us $7 billion. When do you think we'll see action on a funding bill? And how do you see that debate playing out?
Well, the big debate has started, Stephanie. Even here in Doral, Speaker Mike Johnson was asked about this during one of his many meetings that he had with the press during his retreat. And he said that a supplemental funding bill, essentially a bill that would continue to fund what's happening in Iran, the federal government appropriating money, is inevitable. It does seem that Republicans are going to help President Donald Trump with finding some sort of funding to continue what's happening in Iran. The number that I'm seeing or heard that's been floated is about $50 billion. That's a lot of money. And that's going to be really difficult for Congress to square, considering that we're currently in more than 30 days of a Department of Homeland Security shutdown, and that has not been fixed either. So the fact that this is going to be the next issue on Capitol Hill, as we know, Stephanie, I've talked about this with you so many times, having Congress try to find appropriations and pass appropriations, even if they're essential, is incredibly hard. They always have an uphill climb when it comes to these issues. And this is just going to be another thing that they have to tack on to their to-do list that they're already going to have a lot of difficulty to push through.
My goodness. Alex, you cover national security every day. How much real concern is there behind the scenes about our weapons supply?
It's real. One of the main things the Trump administration actually came into office saying was the U.S. does not have enough munitions, there's not enough high-end weaponry in order to fight China, and that China is the big adversary the U.S. should be focused on, so the U.S. needs to husband its resources and save it for that potential fight if it were to come. And now you saw them start their administration by sending, millions of dollars worth of that weaponry into Yemen to fight the Houthis. They've kept them away from the Ukrainians because they wanted to save that for China, and now we're using it here. And so it's interesting. Not only are there questions about will the U.S. have enough for a China conflict if that were to happen. And by the way, I should note, it's really hard to rebuild these things. Maybe hard is too strong. It takes a long time to rebuild these things. So this isn't something that can be easily replaced. So there's sort of a window of opportunity here for adversaries if they want to take advantage of the U.S. simply not having enough of these things, and particularly air defenses. And then there's the whole Russia sanctions thing, which we could get to. But now, when you talk to the Trump administration, they would say on the high-end weaponry, actually, it's fine. It's particularly on the offensive stuff. There's enough. They've accounted for this. And so, those concerns are overblown. But it's the air defenses that are particularly concerning. And we should note that there's reports already of the U.S. removing some of those air defenses from Korea and moving to the Middle East. And those air defenses were there largely, China is one concern, but of course the North Koreans themselves. So a lot of assets and weapons and millions of dollars worth, billions of dollars worth of them are being put into the Middle East solely for this conflict.
Dave, Pete Hegseth today, I aired a little bit of it at the top of the show, said this is not 2003. We are not looking to stay in Iran. This is not about endless wars or nation building. But Trump says he wants to be involved in Iran's future. He says we're going to make them economically better, bigger, stronger than ever before. How do you square those two? Because that doesn't seem to be aligned.
I know what they're trying to square, which is you say nation building, and Americans with long enough memory imagine guardsmen serving multiple tours in a foreign country trying to staff it until it becomes a democracy. That's something that Pete Hegseth in the 2000s was more of an advocate for the surge, et cetera, not an advocate for now. And so they've defined it down where if we have enormous commitments, enormous financial commitments, bases in the region, et cetera, and we're trying to determine who runs the country, as we're doing in Venezuela right now. That's not nation building. It's not nation building unless we send troops there. I do think more than there are things I've discussed in the show, that's more compelling to some people. And again, Trump exploited this in the campaign. It was a message. People have noticed this for a couple of weeks. Stephen Miller, Tulsi Gabbard, et cetera, all saying that there was going to be Iraq-style nation building and war in Russia and Iran and who knew where else. So they've set the bar very, very, very high. Okay, we're not going to do a Bush in 2002. That means we're not nation building. I don't know how convincing that is long term, especially when the president's message on whether the war is about to end changes after 4 p.m. on the East Coast.
Changes just around the time of the closing bell. Alex, Daniela, Dave, thank you for starting us off tonight. Coming up later in the program, new reporting on the so-called growing pardon industry. You're going to want to stay up for this under President Trump. Plus, my dear friend, my partner, Ali Velshi, is at the big board breaking down tonight's races in Georgia and Mississippi. What clue they hold for both parties heading into the midterms. But first, right after the break, stock market whiplash over the war in Iran, and Wall Street is searching for any signal of how long it'll last. We're going to get into it. Money, Power, Politics is next. The 11th hour just getting underway on a Tuesday night. It is time now for Money, Power, Politics. And it was another choppy trading day on Wall Street. The Dow finished the session just over 30 points down, not a big deal, but that was after losing almost 300 points earlier in the day. The S&P also fell, as did oil prices, which just yesterday, of course, spiked to nearly $100 per barrel. And I remind you, in December, they were $55 a barrel. This volatility shows investors are still struggling to get a handle on the war in Iran, something they seem to have in common with the Trump administration. Earlier today, the official X account for Energy Secretary Chris Wright posted a video with a caption claiming the U.S. Navy had, quote, successfully escorted an oil tanker through the Strait of Hormuz to ensure oil remains flowing to global markets. Apparently, that was wrong. The post was very quickly deleted, and the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt later confirmed that the U.S. Navy has not escorted a tanker or any vessel at this current time. Brendan Greeley joins us now. He's a contributing editor for the Financial Times, and Dan Nathan is back, CNBC contributor and co-host of the podcast Risk Reversal. Okay, Dan, this is what blows my mind. Even when the White House confirmed that Chris Wright was wrong and we did not escort a vessel through the Strait of Hormuz, the markets are still saying, oh, it's okay. I'm surprised that the markets have not had a bigger reaction. Is that they're just so optimistic and they believe that they are such Trump whisperers, or he's a taco guy that he's not actually going to let things fall?
I think it has something to do with the taco. But, you know, at the end of the day, there has been a big disconnect between what's going on in oil and what's going on in the stock market. And for whatever reason, if you think about, you know, the 30-some% sell-off we had in and around the tariff rollout back in April, you know, we also had a lot of other things moving around. We had the dollar rallying. We had rates rallying. We actually had the dollar get hit really hard, but they were all over the place. The point about volatility is that when you see uncertainty about the, you know, what's going on around you, you know, lots of market participants, they just kind of move stuff around. They shoot first, ask questions later. In this bout of volatility, we really only had the S&P 500, which was at an all-time high just a few weeks ago. It sold off about 5%. That is such a run-of-the-mill sort of move.
That's my point. We're at war, and 5%'s no biggie.
Yeah, well, I guess that investors have been conditioned to buy dips, right? When it comes comes to oil, that's the thing that most investors don't have an exposure to, but they can kind of impute it into what's going on, into the earnings of the stocks that they own. And for whatever reason, when you just think about the lack of volatility in the equity markets, a lot of folks have just, again, going back to the Russia invasion of Ukraine, we didn't have much of reverberations as it related to the stock market. So at the end of the day, I think it's going to be where if oil prices stay high, investors are going to start thinking about the disruption to supply chains, going back to COVID, going back to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, going back to obviously just the tariff situation a year ago, and now this. And you put it all together, and some of the disruptions to supply chains will not get better. They will not be fixed. And the longer oil stays here, the more it's going to weigh on consumer confidence. And ultimately, if we start seeing GDP numbers go lower, unemployment go higher, inflation sticky on the way higher, that's when the stock market is going to start paying attention.
Brendan, you better step up. Dan just had an all-star response to question one. And you know who agrees with him? The CEO of Aramco, who warned today that there will be, quote, catastrophic consequences if access is not restored to the Strait of Hormuz. What does that tell you?
Well, here's the problem with this idea that Trump will taco. Trump always chickens out. The problem is that Trump forgets that other people have agency, including Iran, and he might not be able to chicken out. There's some reports that Iran has already actually started laying mines in the Strait of Hormuz. So, it's very clear that he is talking because he worries about markets. There are only two things that move him, two numbers. It's the price of gas and the S&P 500. The problem is, once that strait is closed, there's nothing that he can do. There's no decision that he can make to open it back up. So the administration announced that it was going to offer a reinsurance program to ships going through the Gulf. That's essentially through the strait. That's essentially an insurance program for very high risk, very high severity events. The problem is, you can't reinsure against a mine. You can reinsure against a hurricane, but once the mines are there, it's very difficult to encourage people to start moving through that again. Here's the issue, Steph. It's not just oil and natural gas. It's fertilizer going into the planting season that comes out through the strait. And the price of gas, the longer it stays up, the more it feeds into other prices as well. Right now, we're just looking at the price at the pump, which is bad enough for Americans. But if the price at the pump stays up long enough, that starts to affect the prices of lots of other products, and you actually get a lock-in on inflation. So I think the real question is, how long are oil companies willing to actually avoid hiking prices? And they're not really known for avoiding hiking prices.
You know, it's worth noting, Steph, that you have to go back nearly 40 years the last time a U.S. naval vessel passed through the Strait of Hormuz. We were actually doing the thing that the administration wants to do right now, and it was in 1988 during the Iran-Iraq War, and one of our ships was bombed, and 37 sailors were killed. And when you think about what's going on right here, just the tweet, and that did cause a lot of traders, a lot of investors to take a look at that sort of thing. And this is obviously a very unpopular war. But think about this. When you start putting U.S. sailors in harm's way just to do the thing, to avoid something that is really an economic thing that's very domestic in an election year, I just don't think that's going to fly.
This isn't the 80s, though. Brendan, the U.S. is now the world's largest oil producer. So why is a supply crunch on the other side of the world driving up gas prices this much? Like, we have to remember, we're not in the same situation that we were decades ago in terms of oil dependency.
Yeah, we're not in terms of oil dependency, but it's very difficult to disentangle global oil markets. Brent crude is the price we use for Saudi oil. WTI is the price we use for oil that's coming out of Texas in the U.S. But they tend to, over time, move together. The oil market is global. So unless we're prepared to shut off our borders and not export any oil and just have a single American price, then ultimately what happens in the world, we're going to feel here as well. The good news for Trump is other countries are concerned as well. That's probably the best thing he has going for him right now, is that the G7 is getting together and discussing the possibility of opening up other oil reserves to lower the price, because U.S. is an oil exporter. Lots of other countries, important countries, are oil importers, and they are as scared, if not more scared, than Trump right now. But it's really going to be difficult to insulate the price of oil in America from what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz.
If oil remains high, the economic effects of Trump's big, beautiful tax cuts could actually get wiped out. How politically devastating would that be for Republicans?
Well, the longer it goes, and I think that's one of the things that, if he wants to kind of extract himself, it doesn't mean the war is over, right? And Brendan just kind of spoke to that. I mean, you can start a war, getting out of it's a little different, and especially when you have Israel that has very different objectives than we do. And when you just look at the war that they kind of conducted in Gaza, I mean, they really did what they wanted to do for as long as they wanted to do it, and they were fine, causing a ceasefire when, certain conditions were met. And, I think about just the impact that you're talking about. Okay, so like we have this situation, political year, affordability, all that sort of stuff. I mean, it really doesn't matter if you have gas at the price of the pump, or up from $3, I think on average last year, it's right $3.50 or something like that. Even if we're coming to $3.30, we're talking about tens of billions of dollars, which will wipe out the benefits of individual tax returns. The other thing that is not really factored into this is, like, what about the cost of higher health care for 20 million Americans or something?
We haven't even talked about it.
And that's the one thing that really frustrated me about the bill, if you will, the tax bill, is like, how do you think about, who is being most adversely affected, right, by inflation? It's the people that actually can deal with it the least. And then you put on top of it the healthcare stuff. So again, this is a political issue that is not going to go away. Even if you see, gas at the pump go back to, $3 a gallon or something like that, it is the cumulative effects of all of these things. We talk about these supply chain disruptions. What does that mean about inflation expectations? Those are the things that are keeping inflation or interest rates higher. And we're going to have a new Fed chair coming in a few months if Tom Tillis lets it happen. And this is not going to be the thing. He is not going to be able to come in and do what the president wants, is lower interest rates dramatically in this environment, because inflation is only going to get stoked.
Yeah, that's why it may serve Kevin Warsh. The longer it takes for Kevin Warsh to get confirmed, the better it is for him. He's closer to the midterms and less under the president's thumb. Gentlemen, thank you. Great job tonight, Dan. Thanks. Brendan, great to see you. When we return, she was once Trump's fiercest defender. Now Georgia voters are looking for Marjorie Taylor Greene's replacement. Ali Velshi is at the big board in his vest to break down the results. Keep it here. All right, election fans. Tonight we are tracking results of two key races. In Georgia's special election to replace Marjorie Taylor Greene, Trump-backed Republican Clayton Fuller and Democrat Sean Harris are now headed to a runoff April 7th after no candidate won a majority. Remember, Greene resigned from her seat in January after a public falling out with the president. When down in Mississippi, Democratic Representative Benny Thompson defeated a younger primary challenger in his reelection bid. The congressman has represented his district for more than 30 years. My dear friend and partner, Ali Velshi, is at the big board to break it all down. Let's start with Georgia. There was a lot of Republicans running.
A lot of Republicans. There are 11 Republicans in the race. In the South, in Georgia and everywhere else in the South, you have to get 50% or more to win. Nobody got 50%, so the top two candidates are going to a runoff. But it's interesting math here. The leading vote getter tonight was the former Brigadier General Sean Harris. He ran against Marjorie Taylor Greene the last time around, got about 35% of the vote, so he's outperformed himself a little bit now by 37. He's got 37.33% of the vote. There were two other Democrats in the race, so add a couple percentage points to that. Democrats have outperformed in this district. The Republican who is going ahead is Clayton Fuller. He's Trump endorsed, but he's actually not as Trumpy as the third guy, Colton Moore. But if you add all these 11 up, they're going to get to about 60% of the vote. Apparently, if you assume everybody sticks to the way they voted this time around, your election's probably going to be about 60-40 of a Republican to a Democrat, so it probably doesn't flip the seat, but pretty strong performance by Sean Harris, again, a retired brigadier general. He performed very well in areas of this district that are close to Atlanta. So you see all these counties around Atlanta. These are typically blue counties. Cobb County is just to the west of that. Again, it's considered a part of Atlanta. So, he did very well here, but he also did well in the northern parts of the state near Tennessee. So that was an interesting development in Georgia. Let me just show you, Stephanie, what Georgia's going to look like. Today was a special election. It is a special election. This is not a primary. So this person who wins this election will go on to fill the rest of Marjorie Taylor Greene's term, which ends at the end of this year. But they're going to a runoff on April 7th. So this district will vote again on April 7th. The rest of Georgia has a primary on May 19th. And again, you have to get 50%. So if you don't do that, they'll vote again on June 16th. That's the runoff. Then everybody votes on November 3rd. But it's still not finished in Georgia, because if you don't get 50% on November 3rd, you end up on another runoff on December 1st. So it's potentially there are some Georgia voters who are actually going to vote 6 times in this particular race.
Hold on. How long is it going to take before Marjorie Taylor Greene's seat, like practically speaking, is filled?
April 7th. That night will be decided because the 2 front runners go in, and that will be the determination. So that person will be in the seat from April 7th till the end. Now, it remains to be seen what happens in the primary, which is in May, but that's for the next congressional term that gets voted on in November.
Can you tell us anything about the direction the party is headed in based on any results we saw tonight?
Well, I'd say this. Sean Harris outperformed himself, but when you look at some of the special elections we've seen, particularly in the South, in Tennessee and Texas, Democrats have been ahead in some cases, or they flipped it by 15 or 17 points. Sean Harris is about 4 points ahead of where he was. So this is not a big flip. But I will remind you, this is the northwest part of Georgia. This is perhaps some of the most conservative, Trumpy parts of the country. When Marjorie Taylor Greene first ran, she didn't even have a Democratic opponent. So there's movement. It shows you some swing, but not much swing. The question is, how much swing are you going to get in a place like northwestern Georgia?
What can you tell us about Mississippi?
Mississippi had a primary tonight as well. The only one that we were really looking at is the 2nd district. This is Benny Thompson's district. He has won pretty decisively. 85% of the vote is in, and he has 86% of it. There was some thinking that his challenger, Evan Turnage, would pose that sort of generational question about sort of an older incumbent versus a newer person, but that didn't end up working. Benny Thompson has remarkable strength in Congress and in his district, so he will be returning as the candidate for the elections in Mississippi's 2nd district. No other changes anywhere else. The 3rd district was uncontested. There were again, the expected victories in the other 2 districts, so no big takeaways from Mississippi tonight, except that Benny Thompson is safe.
Here's my big takeaway. MS Now is lucky to have Ali Velshi at the big board. And you know what you can do tomorrow? Tomorrow, you can see Ali Velshi and I again. Our live stream is back. It's happening with Velshi and Rule. Make sure to send us your video questions. Remember, it's an hour of your questions and our best answers. Send your questions to Velshi Rule at MS Now, and we're going to answer them. Just scan the QR code on your screen. You can watch us on YouTube. It starts at 3 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. But before we go to break, there's one thing I want to make sure you guys are up to speed on. Okay. President Trump has told Republicans that passing their voter ID law, the SAVE Act, you've heard all about it, the SAVE Act, would guarantee the midterms. Not only that, but he is pushing for an even stricter version that is making its way through Congress. I want you to watch this.
What I've asked Mike to do is to draw a new one with these few things added, and let's go for the gold. Let's not just get one like voter ID. So those 5 things. 5 things. Voter ID, citizenship, mail-in ballots, no mail-in ballots. Right? We don't want men playing in women's sports, and no transgender mutilation of our children. I'm willing to just sort of say I'm not going to sign anything until this is approved.
Okay, so the SAVE Act. The president says he will not sign any other legislation until this passes. So I want to talk to you about what it would actually mean. Under the current proposal, to vote, you would need to show valid photo ID. To register, you would need to show proof of citizenship, like a passport or a birth certificate. Republicans make that sound like it's not a big deal. But here's the issue. The Brennan Center estimates that 21 million eligible voters do not have these documents readily available, and at least 3.8 million do not have access to them at all. As of 2023, 50% of eligible voters don't have a passport. Getting one costs anywhere between $65 and $200. But more importantly, you should not need to have to pay any money to exercise a constitutional right. That is what voting is. The Brennan Center also found millions of Americans don't have access to their birth certificate. And if you're a married woman who changed her name, that's me, that birth certificate, if you can find it, it will not help you. Just to put a finer point on this situation, this is a solution in search of a problem. It is already illegal for non-citizens to vote in federal elections, and confirmed instances of voter fraud are extremely, extremely rare. I thought you should know. When we come back, new reporting uncovers a possible blueprint for a Trump pardon. And now others are throwing money at lobbyists to get clemency too. The reporter who broke this very important story joins us next. A presidential pardon is supposed to be an extraordinary act of mercy, but a new report from the New York Times sheds light on what's known as a growing pardon industry, where very wealthy offenders are hiring lobbyists and lawyers with close ties to Trump in hopes of securing pardons. The Times reports that according to congressional filings, lobbying firms disclosed receiving payments of nearly $5.2 million last year from clients seeking clemency for Mr. Trump for individuals, about 8 times more than was disclosed in 2024 from people seeking clemency from former President Biden. They point out, though, that that is most likely just a small fraction of the spending, since not all of it has been disclosed. Ken Vogel, reporter for the New York Times and author of this report, joins us. Ken, I'm on one level, I'm not surprised, and on another, this story blew my doors off. For many of us, the whole pardon process gives us the icks, no matter who's the president. But the fact that we've now reached a level where there's a pardon industry, what can you tell us?
Yeah, the pardon process, at least as set up by the Justice Department, is intended to identify and vet worthy recipients. These are folks who have either served their time, shown remorse, atoned, paid restitution, and show an unlikelihood to reoffend, essentially. And President Trump has basically disregarded that entire process. He doesn't really work through the Justice Department. Instead, the White House counsel's office handles this, and the applications that are getting to his desk are those that are from people who either have connections directly to him or have money to hire people who do have those connections. Those people are skipping to the front of the line, and they are getting clemency, oftentimes without having served any time. So a lot of people haven't reported at all. Some haven't even been sentenced. At least one case, there was not even a conviction yet. And these are people who, in a lot of cases, are protesting their innocence all the way to the end. And what they're doing, they're pitching their case. In addition to having help getting to the front of the line, they're pitching their cases to President Trump by saying, just like you, President Trump, I too was victimized by a politicized Justice Department. So they're playing on his own grievances and utilizing the connections that they have to people who can get to him in a way that really it seems to sort of turn on its head the premise behind clemency.
But getting to him is not about appealing to his empathetic sense or their plight. Getting to him costs big dollars. That's what this is about. You have got people that are directly profiting from these pardons, those lobbyists, those lawyers. That's how you get to him. Money.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they've capitalized on his transactional approach to really everything, but applying it to clemency here, and also these grievances. I mean, they know that it's not enough to just get to him. Sure, you have to know someone or pay someone who knows someone to get to him. But then once you get to him, the case has to be made in a way that resonates either with his politics. In some cases, he's trying to drive some point, or his grievances, and their magic words, including politicized prosecution, including if you can say that a case was brought by the Biden Justice Department, that really presses his buttons. And so, yeah, we've seen an industry develop that's quite lucrative. I mean, the $5.2 million is likely just a tiny fraction of the amount that's being spent, because a lot of these folks are lawyers, and they're saying, oh, I'm not lobbying the president. This is a continuation of the legal work that we would typically do for a case, even though these cases have largely been adjudicated by the time that they get, to the clemency stage.
Well, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said in a statement, anyone spending money to lobby for pardons is foolishly wasting their money, and the president doesn't even know who these so-called lobbyists are. She added that the Trump administration has a robust pardon review process and called the president the final decider. What is your reaction to that? Because you said in doing your due diligence for this story, every single pardon was like a puzzle.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there is the stated rationale behind these, and it usually has something to do with, an over prosecution or sentences that are sort of incongruous with the crimes committed. But there's always a backstory. There's always some explanation for how these things actually got to Trump, and it usually has little to do with the stated rationale. And I will say, during the first Trump administration, a couple differences. Number one, he didn't start, I mean, most presidents don't start these controversial clemency grants until the end of their term. And this time he came right in off the bat and issued the sweeping pardons to nearly 1,600 people who were convicted of crimes related to the January 6th attack on the Capitol by his supporters. But then also he stopped making these public, the White House has stopped making these public justifications. So you don't even see who has supported the clemency grants, even if in the first case, the first term, there was some backstory that wasn't always real. At least they were saying something about it. Here, you don't even know who the pardons are. It's that sometimes it requires some sleuthing to even figure out who the pardons are before the White House or the Justice Department announces them. And then B, there's not a lot of breadcrumbs. The breadcrumbs that you find are looking through campaign finance reports to find people whose families donate, or in some cases the actual offenders donated to President Trump's super PACs or his campaigns, or you look in the lobbying reports. And so, yeah, there's an element of a puzzle here, and the stated rationale for the clemency grants almost never really are the full story.
There are not a lot of breadcrumbs, which is one of the many reasons we are grateful for your extraordinary reporting. And a reminder, subscribe to the New York Times. Ken, thank you so much. Amazing reporting. We'll be right back.